Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Development Control. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of the room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Please note this evening's meeting is being webcast live on the internet. And could everybody turn off mobile phones or put them to silent? Thank you. For the benefit of the members of the public watching or participating in this meeting, I would like to explain who everyone is. My name is Councillor Nick Robinson and I'm Chairman of this committee.
Imposter. We know he's broadcast.
Thank you, Benny. To my right are councillors who will be making decisions on the applications on this evening's agenda. To my immediate right and left are officers who will be presenting the applications and providing advice to the committee. The Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee, not a political meeting. The committee will be considering the published papers, examining the evidence brought before us tonight, and will make decisions based on planning reasons. We are guided by national and local planning policy and guidance. At the appropriate time, I will invite speakers to contribute to the meeting in the order set out in the update paper. May I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and keep to points made on the application on material reasons only. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning has finished. All speakers will be reminded of their permitted speaking time and will be advised when they have 1 minute remaining. May I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and keep any comments on each planning item to a maximum of 4 minutes. We have 8 items on the agenda this evening, so hopefully about 3 hours. I understand that planning can be emotive, and I say everyone remains polite and professional through this meeting. Thank you. Apologies for absence and substitutions. I've got Councillor McCormick sitting in for Councillor Howard Sorrell. Are there any others? No. Declarations of interest. Councillor Rattigan, followed by Councillor McCormick, followed by Councillor Falconer.
Thank you, Chair. On item 1, which is in Hurst Cottages, it was called to committee when I was leader of the council. That does not preclude me from tonight's debate and understanding of it. It was called to committee on the basis of a number of reasons. I hope that my distribution of a letter of objection from Sarah Maltby, plus my conversations with former councillors Jeff Poland and Claire Kinnear, indicate that I have come to this meeting with an open mind and will question both the applicant and the parish fully to come to a decision. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As we discussed at the viewing, I'm a member of the campaign for Real Ale, but I do not see this as prejudicial to the application in Whitchurch before us tonight.
Yeah, as regards item 7 on the agenda, the Pirates Cottage, I have, on this application, had my objections published on our planning portal, and therefore I consider that would probably predetermine me, and therefore I will leave the room for that item.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So item number 1, which can be found on page 57 of tonight's agenda, is a full planning application for the erection of 14 dwellings and associated parking at land at Hurst Cottages, Hurst Lane, Borkhurst. If I could draw members' attention to the update paper, you'll note there's a few corrections from the officer's report, as well as the summation of the site viewings undertaken for the application. The application is recommended for refusal as shown on tonight's agenda paper. Thank you.
Thank you. And our first speaker is a member of Hurst Parish Council. Whoever that is, we don't have a name. Could you come forwards? Right. We don't have a person. So, unfortunately, we will have to move on to the objectors. We have Mr. Lenton, Mr. Maltby, Mrs. Maltby, and Mr. Martin. Councillor Rattigan.
Chair, if I may, I handed round a letter from Mr. and Mrs. Maltby to the committee members through their mail, as they unfortunately can't make tonight's meeting, but just wanted to make sure that their words at least were expressed to the committee. So hopefully a number of you did get that letter and received it. So they will not be here tonight. So I just want to make that point to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rattigan. In that case, in support, Mr. Cotterill, Mr. Doyne and Mr. Thorne. And if you come forwards to the Speaker's chairs, yep. You will have 4 minutes between you, and I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Mike Thorne. I'm a Fellow of the Society for Radiological Protection, and I'm the author of the Radiological Impact Assessment on the proposed development. I make a few points. Firstly, the development only lies within the detailed emergency planning zone because that zone has been made larger than the minimum required. A result of this is that the radiation dose to a resident in the event of a major accident would be very small, less than a single CT scan that you get in hospital. Furthermore, the likelihood of such an accident occurring is no more than 1 in 10,000 per year. It requires simultaneous loss of containment in multiple facilities on the AWE Aldermaston site. The radiation dose from an accident would be from short-term inhalation, and it could be reduced tenfold by sheltering. Longer-term dose rates from contamination of the environment would be much less than the annual dose limit for members of the public, and guidance is that you would not take action to reduce those further, which is why it's too far out for even urgent evacuation. And the main requirement, if an accident occurred, would be to encourage people to shelter. This can be achieved by electronic communications, and the resource requirement does not increase significantly with the number of people. That is, the emergency plan is not altered. Overall, residents of the proposed development would be subject to negligible risk, and there would be almost no effect on the development on accident response requirements. And that applies to other developments in the area, and you will be considering items 2 and 3 on your agenda, which have similar type developments for which no objection on grounds of being in the DPZ, I understand, have been raised. Thank you.
So turning to the other reasons for refusal, one of which is the 5-year land supply, and I'm sure I don't need to tell you all about the lack of that. The officers have described the area as open fields and generalised the area as a rural kind of openness to the site. But Hurst Hill to the west has over 30 dwellings. Committee approved the new dwelling at the top of the hill there in April and described the area as being a clustered development pattern. Further to that, there are dwellings along Inhurst Lane, Stokes Lane, and that's without taking into consideration the close proximity of the Hurst School and main Hurst development of Woodlands Road. A commercial yard of this nature, we believe, is really the one that is out of character with the area. The site is very much contained and will only allow for small glimpses of houses, where right now you're seeing shipping containers that are stacked 2 to 3 high. And therefore we're of the view that a high quality residential development will have less impact on the area than the commercial yard does right now, especially if it was to be expanded. There are trees and vegetation that are around the site that are being retained, and there were concerns that were raised in terms of shadowing of gardens. This is incorrect because those trees are on the northern boundary and will not cause shadowing.
Turning 1 minute remaining.
Turning to the social housing side of things, there are currently 43 people that are on a waiting list for social housing in and around August. 9 people have expressed an immediate interest into shared ownership. Our scheme is providing 5 homes made up of 2, 3 and 4 beds that will be finished to the same high standard as the market homes. The housing officer is in full support of the scheme, and the lack of agreement in terms of the legal side can be secured should the application be approved. Turning to what you saw on Friday, the staff and all the equipment will be rehoused to a second site that Mr Doyne actually owns down in Greenham Common. All of the other consultees in terms of biodiversity, highways, environmental health and the flood authority have raised no objections subject to conditions. One of those conditions will be regarding in terms of construction phase and where materials and vehicles will be housed. They will be on the site. So to conclude, this site will provide a good range of high-quality market affordable homes in an area that does have good transport links with buses to Woodlands Road every 20 minutes, will make efficient use of the land and will make a considerable contribution to the 5-year land supply and the waiting list for affordable homes. And I therefore ask you to please approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the speakers? Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. I just, obviously there's highways concerns from a number of objectors. How would you ensure that that lane is not blocked during construction period?
Thank you for your question there, Councillor. So in terms of standard conditions, obviously we have the construction method statements that is standard for all new housing sites. One of those things will obviously be put forward as a condition from the officers. So to ensure that, we will obviously put hoarding around the site. We will make sure that all the materials, all the deliveries, staff that work on the site, all the materials are going to be housed inside the site. There will be a banksman on the site, which obviously that person will be responsible for making sure if there's any dirt ends up on the road for cleaning things down. One of the things, just as a site, Mr Doyne does run a very large construction company, so doing these things in terms of reinforced concrete, motorways, that type of thing, Thames Water and things. Noel is very, very up to speed in terms of how to look after a construction site, and that's exactly what will be applied here, the same methodology. So we will make sure that we will not be impacting on any of the surrounding areas.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah. Chair, if I may, I just want to understand the protection of the 2 houses that are there. There was concern that from those residents that obviously they've got noise at the moment, but how are they going to be protected with a new development right on their side? Because those 2 houses look at the moment as though they're standing isolated, and I was there today to as Bernie asked which pub did I go to, but it's not true, I didn't go to any pub, but I was there and noticed how isolated those 2 cottages are. Are you protecting them? Are they in your ownership? What is going to happen with them?
So in terms of the actual 2 cottages that you're seeing there now, they actually are owned by Mr Doyne as well. They're currently housing some of his workers, one of them actually is. They're in a poor state. We actually currently have an application in, I'm looking at Ruth at this point, for applications to be able to refurbish those buildings and turn them into slightly more usable houses, because at the moment the stairs are increasingly steep. They're not the nicest houses inside, but they are in Noel's ownership. They will be fully refurbished to the same standard as the houses on the rest of the site, and then obviously they will be retained by Mr Doyne to be able to be rented out as well. So, okay.
Councillor Gaskell.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned that this area was in the DPZ zone, or just in it. Have you made any consultation with the relevant authorities to see if that could be moved?
On this and all the other developments I've looked at, both in the area of AWE Aldermaston and AWE Burfield, I've consulted with West Berkshire. effectively, their position is, I think, that the DEPZ zones are what they are, that they have made numerous visits to the area, and they have done what they are perfectly entitled to do, which is to draw the DEPZ larger than the minimum required from the sites. The argument for this is that you don't want to divide communities. The downside of it is that you place substantial numbers of people in the DEPZ and give them the impression that they are in an emergency zone, whereas what you have done is created that zone for convenience. So I have had that dialogue, and I continue to have that dialogue as the opportunity arises.
Sorry, Chair, can I have a second question now?
Councillor Gaskell again, yeah, followed by Councillor Harvey.
So my concern is that for whatever reason they've drawn this zone up, and if we were to give permission to you tonight, it would create a precedent for further development which would have an impact on their safety procedures within the AWE.
I think this is an important point, and I think the issue is that such incremental developments are perfectly legitimate. The problem that I see is that the standard response to each of these is that it cannot be accommodated within the emergency plan. And the argument for that has to be that there is some significant increase in resources involved in incorporating it in the plan. But in fact, for any development in the wider part of the DEPZ, doses are sufficiently small that you would not do immediate evacuation, which is to 150 metres from the boundary fence. You would not do urgent evacuation, which is acknowledged to be no more than 600 metres from the fence. The residual doses for much of the rest of the area at DPZ are low, and therefore I cannot see, because essentially all you're asking people to do is ensure that they shelter. So all you have to do in the emergency plan is make sure that there are routes of communication to residents so they know to shelter. So I think that there is not a problem with incremental increases within the DEPZ, but there is a problem with the perception that there should not be such incremental development in the wider part of the DEPZ. Sorry, that was rather a long answer, but it's a tricky subject.
Can I just follow up on that as well to say that obviously in terms of precedences and all those things to quote officers, all planning applications are assessed obviously on their own merits. So just because if you were minded to approve this one tonight doesn't mean that it will suddenly open up the floodgates and every single one will just be a carte blanche, off you go, have your approval. All right. So I like quoting people.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. You're asking us to flip an officer recommendation for refusal, and in the context of affordable housing, we see that you are not providing policy compliant affordable housing, and further than that, there is no Section 106 agreement currently in place for the on-site provision, so there's no guarantee that you provide the 5 in the first place anyway. So no viability, no Section 106, you're not policy compliant. Why in the world should we flip this application in front of us from refuse to approval on the basis of that? You're not even meeting our policy compliant affordable housing.
Thank you very much. So in terms of the way that the design process has happened, we were fully compliant. We had 6 affordable homes in our first original design. Through the actual design process, I've worked with the officers and also with the housing officer to go through in terms of our design, and along the way things obviously do change. The housing officer is in full support of this application. They requested that we put in 1 4-bedroom home. So when you look at what we've done, although yes, you're saying obviously we're non-compliant, but there is room within the policy where it's demonstrated that if you don't meet the full requirements, as long as you have the support of the office of the housing officer, you can deviate from that. And I'm trying to find the actual wording that the housing officer actually said. It's in the report. It does make state that in there, and that is the overall wording. So, like I say, the section 106 side of things. Again, that can be brought forward as a condition and legal informative should approval be agreed tonight, and obviously. Legally, or correctly speaking, from a planning point of view, in terms of conditions, I've not seen any conditions as yet because obviously the application was recommended for refusal. So the process will happen. Obviously, if it is approved tonight, then officers will put those conditions forward. We will go through those conditions. We will look at agreeing to those conditions, and then any legal informatives that we need to do, obviously we will put that in place. I believe Noel has already made contact with a couple of the housing association companies, Vivid and whoever else. It's very, very early doors right now, obviously, in talking to those people. But in terms of go to my waiting list I told you about earlier. There are 43 people waiting for housing or social housing in Borghurst. They're on a list waiting for that. There are 9 people that have expressed an immediate interest in the shared ownership or the social renting schemes. The numbers of what they're looking for is based on 3, 4 and 2, 3 and 4 bedroom houses, which is obviously what we're looking to provide. All right.
So just to confirm then, will the 4-bedroom house be an affordable unit? What is the split for shared ownership that you're proposing of the proposed affordable housing? And how do you intend to manage the shared ownership? Will they be managed by an RP, or will you seek to manage them in any way, shape or form yourselves?
So the 4-bedroom house is down for an affordable unit. In terms of the actual split, in terms of whether it's shared ownership and all those types of things, the way that we've approached this is that, in terms of speaking to Vivid, look at what the requirements actually are. So some of these people that are on this list, they're saying that there's a requirement for some to be shared ownership and some to be for the renting scheme. In terms of what Vivid would like to do, or whoever it goes, I'll keep saying Vivid, whichever one it goes towards, they will be taking those on board. They will be looking at how they do that split, and I believe that's kind of the standard way in which these kind of things happen, because they know the market, they know what people they've got waiting for and looking for those affordable homes.
Any more questions? Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I just have one really, and that's with the number of consultees that that are actually outlined in the report. We have objections from Borghurst Parish Council with various objections. We have objections from the Urban Design Officer, whose initial comments were objection, and the final comments were objection. The Historic Environment Officer objected initially and also finally objected. Okay, the Landscape Officer objected initially, and his final comments were still objecting. Okay, the Waste Officer says that it's got standing advice. The Tree Officer was objecting. Okay, and the lead local food authority was saying that further information is needed. With all these objections, including the emergency planners, which I think you've answered correctly, why should we flip? Okay, planning officer recommendation and approve this application?
Do you have to turn your mic off? Does it? Sorry. So in terms of the objections, like you've just done now, so I can go through them. In terms of the parish council, they're not here tonight to obviously defend their position in terms of how they are. There is a lot of objection that comes from the parish council. I've got various views on that, which I won't go into. Urban design, we've working with Philip on the actual case and going through the designs. Things were changing as we were going, and I've got to a point where with the urban designer, I think we were pretty much 95% there, and I think that they were, and Philip can confirm that. But in terms of the extra bits, it was to do with some of the materials that, and what brick we were going to use, what tile we were going to use, and the overall finishing, rather than the layout of the site, is the way that my understanding is. And obviously, again, because we've not agreed conditions, that would be a condition for us to put forward which brick, which tile, how, you know, for the overall finish of the style of the houses. So I think from that point of view, we were working, you know, to come to a conclusion on that one. I think we would obviously get there with the materials. In terms of the historic environment, there is obviously the existing cottages. They are in a poor state. You know, as I said to you, you know, we are looking to increase those to a much better standard. The historic environment team, again, they're looking at an application that we have for other little extensions and stuff on there. So there was a joined up thinking from that point of view. But again, it's to do with the impact on those cottages in terms of what the historic environment team were on about. Now, as it stands right now, obviously it's a commercial site. You've all seen what goes on in there. You've seen the equipment. You've seen the things that are in there. And there is no, in terms of restrictions to that site, it is a site that can be 24/7. And you know, if you're looking at it quite bluntly, is it better to have the commercial yard there, or are the residential units going to actually bring these two cottages back to a residential area? And like I said in my speech, I think that, you know, from a commercial yard point of view, I think that's the one that's out of keeping with the area, and I think that's out of character. Landscape officer, you know, there was an objection obviously from the landscape there. Talking about the character of the area, most of Borghurst and in and around that area with the Wolverton description, it basically covers most of Borghurst to be a leafy, tree-lined, rural kind of area. Well, that's not necessarily the case in every single part of Borghurst and in and around that area. You know, when you go to Woodlands Road and around there, obviously it becomes urban, doesn't it? You know, so again, back to the whole thing of, do we want the commercial side there with the residential, with the shipping containers and all the equipment that's there? Again, or is it better for looking at the residential units? My view is that because there's the existing trees and all of the vegetation that's around there, I believe residential units of a high quality will be, you know, better than what is there. And the local flood side of things, again, that's actually an error in the report, and it's in the update paper to say that their actual comments were no objection further to some conditions, wasn't it, in terms of where they're at. And I think, you know, from that point of view, I think we are there with the scheme, I believe, and I think it's come together quite well. The highway side of things, just one more thing, Chairman, sorry. In terms of the access point, highways didn't want us to use the existing access, which is why we've had to move the access to put in a new access point to get the suitable distances from Stokes Lane, and that also changed the layout of the site. So from a design point of view, that's why, you know, the house types changed a little bit and things were moved, you know, in terms of their positions on the site. All right.
Councillor McCormack, followed by Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. So I was just looking at the drawings on pages 82 onwards. So I've got a rough idea of the height of these proposed properties. The ridgeway, probably between the roof ridge, is about 4 to 5 metres high. Approximately how high are the existing facilities that we saw on site visit, the containers and storage and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so a normal shipping container is around, I think it's getting on for 3 metres, isn't it? And they're stacked 2 to 3 high, so they're between 6 and 9 metres. And again, there is no restrictions in terms of what Noel can do. I don't know if you were on the site visit, but you saw the big crane and the things that were there, and all the other equipment that you've seen on the overhead projector, you know, that's being stacked up and being moved around. So there's no restrictions. So yeah, all right.
Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to move back to my previous question, and I understand your view is that this application is significantly better than an industrial site. Okay, and to be fair, I do have some empathy with that. Okay, however, you didn't answer my question. Okay, my question is that here in this report, which you are asking us to make a decision on, okay, we have objections from the urban design officer. You say that they're nearly there, but our report doesn't say that. Our report says the final comments were objection. Okay, it says from the historical environment officer. Okay, I know you covered that, but it says here final comments objection. Okay, it says here the landscape officer. Okay, I know you covered that. It says final comments objection, and we have all these objections, including the 6 or 7 objections from the parish council, who would be representing their residents locally. So why should we, okay, ignore all of that and approve this this application?
Right, okay. So in terms of, again, back to the urban design, although their comments at the moment, say, obviously in the report as an objection, it hasn't made that forward to one of the 6 reasons for refusal in terms of where they're actually at. So going back to each individual point in terms of where we're at, which is obviously what we're here to then discuss, isn't it, in terms of the 6 reasons for refusal right now. So putting a rebuttal back to that, item 1, in terms of the policy SS6, well, that's your 5-year land supply, so tilted balance and all that, which obviously, we won't go into 5-year land supply because we'll be here all night. Item 2 being DPEZ, which obviously we've presented that kind of position. Number 3 is about the actual character in terms of the pattern and the development in the surrounding area. Well, in terms of the housing positions and the hard standing and the over urbanising of the area, well, that's down to a subjective kind of view in terms of whether you believe that those houses are right in that area or not. Is kind of my take on that. Talking about the established pattern of development, again, going back to Hurst Hill and the top of Hurst Hill and the clustered development in terms of the way that it was described at the top of there. There's a lot of houses crammed into a kind of small area, which, that's kind of, to me, that is almost dictating the kind of the area itself. I know there's 1 or 2 open fields along in Hurst Lane, but I can't see that, that from a character point of view, that this is out of character, and that the commercial yard is more in character, if that makes sense. Number 4 is obviously to do with the housing mix, which I've gone through the housing mix, and I believe, in terms of the mix of the houses that we're providing is right for that area. If we were to follow policy in terms of where it requires that we have smaller houses, well, again, we're then into smaller houses means more houses, which is then contrary to other policy. So it's that, to me, it's that balancing act between getting the right scheme on a site, and I believe that's where we're at. We're obviously providing the affordable homes, which is a key part for development in the area, and I believe we've covered that. In terms of the trees, again, it talks here about the pressures to remove some of these trees because they're potentially overshadowing of gardens. And when you look at the tree officer's objections, it talks about overshadowing of the trees on the northern boundary. Well, for me, the sun's to the south, and it's the house that will overshadow the gardens and not the trees. So I can't see, as to why that, in my eyes, why that's made to be a reason for an actual refusal. So I know I've sort of rambled a little bit, Councillor, but I think I've kind of making my point. I don't know if you look confused as to whether I've actually answered the question or not, but I don't know if I have or not. But
Councillor Freeman.
Just a quick one. How many of the houses that you've got planned have you plans for things like solar panels on the roof, air source heat pumps, etc., environmentally friendly building plans?
Sorry, I've got a bit of a cold. So in terms of the actual houses, although that doesn't form part of the actual planning here, it is proposed that all the houses, and we did put that in the design and access statement and the planning statement, Mr. Doyle is currently building some houses in Ireland which are completely A-rated, and in terms of how they work, their solar panels, got the air source heat pumps, they are an amazing home, and we want to bring that technology to here, and this is the way that the government is obviously also wanting housing to go, isn't it? You know, so we will be looking at solar panels, we will be looking at MVHR systems, triple glazing. Excuse me, I'm going to cough. And all the other bits that will be, you know, electric car charging points and all those things from a sustainable building point of view. But again, that can be secured by way of conditions. It should the officers, you know, decide that they want to go down that route.
Thank you.
Any more questions from anybody? No? Thank you very much, gentlemen. Questions to officers? Councillor Rattigan, followed by Councillor Freeman, followed by Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. And when we were on the viewing panel, I asked if we could see where the rings of extended to from the DEPZ zone for the 3 planning permissions that we're looking at tonight in the Tadley area. I was assured that we would get that so as we could see if they were on the perimeter or not. Ah, perfect. So we can see where they are and what they do. I presume that red dot in the centre is where the nuclear explosion would happen. Is that right? Possibly not. No. I just wanted to. The reality is that it does seem particularly bizarre that we have 3 applications all within the DEPZ zone, and yet only one has got a likely objection from AWE, and that does seem particularly odd, and that's one of the reasons that I would wish to test this with the subjective view in front of this committee. So I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Councillor Freeman.
Just further to my question to the applicant, really, is that right? We can put conditions in to insist on environmentally friendly build or not?
Obviously, the application is recommended for refusal, but if members are minded to recommend the application for permission and they think you're of the opinion that that's necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms to tip the planning balance, then you could impose such a condition, yes.
Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. 2 questions. Firstly, page 61. The Parish Council mentioned that this site is within the impact risk zone of a site of special scientific interest. So what is this site of special scientific interest and how far away is it? That's question 1. And question 2 on the following page 62 relates to the highway officer who initially objected twice and then didn't have an objection. I managed to pull up one of the letters from Hampshire Highways that didn't seem to be very objecting at all. What was the nature of the objection that was withdrawn? Having visited the site, I could see all sorts of potential issues with sight lines and access.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll find out the distance from the impact zone. My recollection was it's not within the SSSI, but we'll just confirm on our mapping system and come back to you. In terms of the highways and the objections, it was largely around the site visibility from the current access, especially given the junction to Stokes Lane further to the north, and it required them to be moved further to the south away from the junction. Following those changes and some additional drawings for vehicle tracking, they were content and raised no objection to the proposal, subject to conditions on visibility. It's loading currently, so if we can come back perhaps to that point, we'll answer it, but we'll come back to that. Thank you.
Councillor Court.
Thank you, Chair. On page 57, the second para, it says very clearly, as such, the proposal will be contrary to the requirements of policy SS7. This refers directly to the detailed emergency planning zone. Based on what you've heard this evening, does that change?
Thank you, Councillor. So throughout the course of the application, further representation was received by the applicant from Mr. Thorne as a report that was sent to the emergency planners and the ONR. The report was reviewed by ONR and they objected to the proposal along similar arguments that have been presented here this evening. On that basis, as their position as experts and consultee, we take their views, and given that, we would support the current reason for refusal that is contrary to SS7. So yeah, despite what we've heard this evening, the reason for refusal would still stand.
I've got Councillor Gaskell, Rattigan and Frost in that order.
Can I just clarify, just to be clear, it still stands? Thank you.
Correct, yes.
Councillor Gaskell.
Thank you, Chair. My question was on similar lines. I was just wondering if you had approached AWE regarding this zone for this or any other development, and what was their reaction, and did they give you any sort of information on why?
Thank you, Chair. So I'm not aware if we've discussed the DPZ with them specifically, but I have asked the question with regards to this site and the difference between this and others on the agenda tonight. From the response I've received, it largely comes down to location and scale. It seems to be this is of a sufficient scale that they were objecting to, whereas the other schemes are that much smaller and within the more populated areas. That's as much information as I have from the ONR and from the emergency planners, as to why they objected to this scheme. And that's all I can really present to you.
Thanks, Chair. If I could just add to that from Philip. When the ONR are looking at any planning application, and as was mentioned, they do look at each site on its own merits, they look at its location relative to each sector that they break the zone down into, and they look at the population and population density within that sector, and they look at the access routes into and out of that sector too. So if there was an emergency, and even if it were to shelter, some people may choose not to shelter as well, or if there was an evacuation, they look at the impact that an additional population and any additional movements that may come with that in the case of an emergency may have on their ability to deliver the off-site emergency plan, so the emergency responders actually being able to effectively evacuate people and actually attend any emergency on the actual site itself. So they do look at the precise location for every application relative to the population and the access routes into and out of it. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you. To the points made by Councillor Court and Councillor Gaskell, I was on the appeal for the Lidl supermarket site, which is much closer to Aldermaston than this site, and there was a standing objection from the atomic weapons team in West Berkshire. And I have to say, there is no restriction on how many people you can get into a supermarket, so it does seem slightly odd. But my point is about that triple SI, which somebody has picked up. The triple SI is in my ward, which is down the hill into Ashford Hill. It is the water meadow there, and there is a big distance, the whole length of Hurst Hill, to if there was any runoff or any flooding chances into that. I just want to make the point that the triple SI is not in this ward, or is in the ward, but not close proximity.
Councillor Rattigan, we are still in questions to officers. I think that would have been more appropriate for debate. Thank you. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about the emergency planning, but the first one is just a matter of dotting the I's and crossing the T's. Page 63, Principle of Development. The very last word on the page is referring to the Bramley Neighbourhood Development Plan being relevant to this site. I think there must be a misprint. Would it be Borkhurst? Just if you could clarify that. Oh.
Yeah.
What then?
Do your mic.
Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, that is just a misprint in there. There's not a neighbourhood plan in Borkhurst as such. Yeah.
So my other question, just for me, the emergency planners, so the Office of Nuclear Regulation, but who are the emergency planners?
Hampshire County Council emergency planners and West Berkshire emergency planners. They also consult with the responding agencies as well.
Thank you. Any more questions for the officers? Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to go back. We've obviously heard from the three gentlemen who were in support of the application. Okay. And I just want to double check, please, okay, on the accuracy of the report we have in front of us. Okay. The Urban Design Officer, their final comments, is that still objection? The Historic Environment Officer, is their final comments still objection? The Landscape Officer, are they still objecting? Okay. The Tree Officer, are they still objecting? Okay. And what was the other one? Okay. There was another one that I saw. That will do.
Thank you, Councillor. So yes, they are still objecting to that one. As the agent for the application said, the Urban Design Officer was largely content with the new layout, but there were details that were still missing, and he also did have concerns in terms of landscape impacts, which were supported by the Landscape Officer. I think the other one you were referring to or looking for was the Lead Local Flood Authority. As it was referred to in the update paper, yes, it's correct that additional information was submitted through the course of the application, and they were content subject to conditions, so that should read on their final comments as no objections subject to conditions. If I could also come back to Councillor McCormack, just on the point you raised earlier about the impact zone. We've had a look at the mapping system, and yes, it does fall within one of the outer rings of the SSSI impact zone, and it's approximately 270 metres from the SSSI itself, which is further to the west.
Thank you. Any more questions before we go to debate? Good. In that case, debate. Councillor Frost, followed by Councillor Freeman.
Thank you very much, Chair. I studied this paper with as I did with all the other planning applications, but as this is in my ward, okay, you know, I studied it really hard, okay, and I have to say that you know, I really quite like the development, but you know, with all the objections that are coming through from officers, okay, and also the emergency planners, I'm siding with the conclusion and in the planning balance that whilst I believe the DPZ needs to be challenged, and it does, it does need to be challenged, because I think that does absolutely nothing for my ward, okay, and also the town of Tadley. Okay, I don't believe that this is the site to do it on. Okay, I really don't. Okay, I think the conclusion and planning balance on page 79 is fairly succinct. Okay, we still have objections from the landscape officer. We have objections from a tree officer. We have, you know, objections from the urban design officer at this moment, and also the historic environment officer. I'm just really struggling to understand how there can be, you know, how we could overturn this application, okay, against, you know, planning officer, you know, advice of refusing the application. So, you know, I understand we don't have the 5-year land supply, but I'm also aware that whilst there is no objection from the housing officer, I'm not convinced that this application, okay, complies with a lot of our policies as laid out in the report. SD1, SS1, SS6, SS7, EM1, EM10, and CM1, okay, amongst others. So, you know, I mean, I would like to listen to the debate, but I am minded to put a motion to accept the planning officer advice and refuse the application.
Councillor Frost, could you clarify, are you proposing this for refusal, or are you minded to possibly propose it in the future?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it doesn't really matter whether it's now in the future. I will propose it now. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Frost. Is there a seconder? Councillor Court. We've got a few more speakers before we go to the vote, so Councillor Freeman.
Thank you. Now, see, I'm minded completely the other way on this one because I happen to think that a small housing development on the site would be far more in keeping with a rural setting than a walloping great construction yard, all the noise, all the dust, all the shipping containers, which are, quite frankly, aren't exactly the prettiest things. And I think it would be more in keeping with a rural setting to have a small housing development there. The point has been made, and we know we don't have a 5-year housing supply. It seems that the issues with the DEPZ could possibly be worked out, and any other details that are lacking here could be sorted by condition. So that's my 2 cents. I think we should go against the officer's recommendation. I think we should be approving this because, like I said, it's far better. It's going to be, in the end, once construction's finished, it's going to be a bit more peaceful. It's going to be a lot more conducive to a rural setting than a walloping great construction yard.
Thank you. Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank my fellow councillors and the applicant and the officers for the detail that they've put into the debate that we've had tonight. As was obvious, I hope, I was predisposed to development on commercial sites rather than predetermined. I think the loss of greenfield sites is an issue for us all, and I think genuinely brownfield sites should be the first place to be developed, if I'm perfectly honest about it. And I look at the officer's report, and from what's been said tonight from Philip Richards, that they have tried to make this the best it can be. So my view is that this is firstly a sustainable site. You can walk to the Hurst School. You've got a bus service that is the most profitable in Stagecoach's world, the number 2 that takes people from Bohurst all the way to the hospital and to the railway station. So this is, although not detailed as a reason for refusal, the sustainability, the fact that it is sustainable should be, in your mind, a positive. The fact that we don't have enough social housing in my ward. We are going to clamour for the big houses, small houses, any sort of house, because the level of sofa surfing in Tadley is huge. I can tell you that right now because I had a phone call this morning about that very subject. We need to test the DEPZ. If we approve it tonight, it's still got to go through that process. We can do that while the officers work out, as Councillor Freeman has said, some of the details within it, like the materials to be used. The fact that we've had no highways objection. I stood there for 15 minutes today, and not just one car went past, but only a van which was delivering Amazon. So they get that urban feel. Would it be incongruous to the current environment? I don't think so. If you look just up the road, there is a row of houses on Stokes Lane that's just there. They were ex-council houses. People seem happy enough to live in them. Is the urban environment encroaching on this? No, because as we've all seen as we went out on the viewing panel, the trees all remain. The idea that a garden is blocked in by the trees is rubbish, frankly, because we know that the houses sit to that side, and they will be the gardens the loss of sunlight will be from their own house. People will purchase on the basis of what they want and the need that they have. So I think genuinely we can absolutely flip this. It is in character. There are large developments within 200 or 300 yards. I think there's nearly 40 houses on Hurst Hill. This is a small expanse of an urban area. But the benefit to those 2 houses that sit there, of losing a commercial site that is noisy all of the time, and as we've seen on Friday, has the ability to put huge cranes in there without any restrictions at all. This, in my view, is the right sort of development and the right one to be tested in regard to AWE and the zones. So if Councillor Freeman is so minded, I am happy to move approval.
Councillor Rattigan, you can't move for refusal when there's already a motion on the table. We've got to take the vote on that first.
Thank you.
Can a point of order? Okay. Can you please just remind me or clarify? Did Councillor Rattigan say that he was predetermined? No. Okay. Please. I'm speaking to the chair. Okay, predetermined. Okay, to build on sites, or did he say that he was predisposed?
No,
I would just like clarification.
I believe
please.
he said predisposed.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wants to speak before we go to the vote? No? Councillor Gaskell.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going back to this DEPZ. I have concerns about that. It's been drawn up by people who are far more educated in this area than we are. It's not for us to sort of override that, really, and for that reason, I can't vote for this development tonight. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. The point about the affordable housing, I think, is worth making, that we don't have an RP on board at the moment. What we have is an offer of affordable housing. We don't have clarity as to which of the properties is going to be rented, which of the properties are going to be shared ownership. We don't have clarity as to which of those shared ownership properties would be subject to management charges that Vivid or whoever it might be would be placing upon those particular properties as separate to how the rental income stream from the affordable housing will be managed, and that is significant for whoever then becomes the residents occupying those units. So there's a number of legal aspects that would need to be clarified were this application to be approved that don't easily sit in a Section 106 agreement. It would sit in an agreement that would have been reached prior to this application coming to the committee, that officers would have negotiated quite rightly in some detail. They haven't done because they're recommending refusal for very good reason, understandable reasons as argued. So my concern would be, yes, it can be conditioned and we can stick a Section 106 agreement, but what you cannot do is box a RP into the sort of things we would want to see in more detail to secure that affordable housing for the benefit of the residents who would eventually live in it. So that for me is a concern that is still outstanding.
Thank you. It's been properly recommended and seconded for refusal. Those in favour of refusal? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. And those against refusal? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is refused. Philip?
Thank you, Chair. So that application has been refused in accordance with the officer's recommendation as shown in tonight's agenda paper. Thank you.
Item number 2, land on the eastern side of Tadley Hill, Tadley. Philip.
Thank you, Chair. Item number 2, which can be found on page 96 of tonight's agenda, is a full application for the erection of 6 dwellings comprising of 2 4-bed and 4 3-bed with associated access parking and amenity space. If I could draw members' attention to the update paper. There's a further letter of objection which has been received, which is summarised for members on the update, and also the notes of the viewing panel. There's also a verbal update with regards to a recommendation for additional condition to restrict any gates across the proposed accesses, which should be included within those list of conditions. The application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions at the end of the report. Thank you.
And if we could have our first speaker, which is Mrs. Davies. Thank you. You have 4 minutes. I will remind you when you've got 1 minute remaining. The microphone button is on the deck in front of you, and the top of the mic will light up red when it's active. Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to express our points. As you will have seen from the committee report, there were 26 letters of objection to this development, all of which I appreciate have been answered within the report, but answered with a tick box strategy, primarily based on black and white information, and my aim today is to try and show some of our concern as reality. As a resident within Tadley for pretty much all of my life, I've seen the village grow into a town and continue growing. I am someone that understands things need to change in order to keep up with the times, that new houses will need to go up in places that not everyone will be happy with. However, I believe that if our town needs to grow, it should benefit those already in it. Tadley has recently seen some large developments, of which include affordable housing, something of which is in desperate need, especially in the current climate. As a resident, I don't feel unaffordable housing is something that our town needs right now, especially in a small plot that will be totally overdeveloped. This plot of land used to have one property years ago as a butcher's, with the lower sections of the land used for cattle to be slaughtered. Following the house being knocked down, the land became no man's land, home to various wildlife, then came along the bees and the chickens. This area was a wonderful asset to the neighbouring allotments, which benefited from this wildlife to encourage the growth of our crops. Whilst the report can provide answers to why this application should be approved, we too are able to provide reasons to counteract these responses. Now the question is, whose response is more important? I'll try to answer some of these. We don't agree the properties will be in keeping with the area. No other section within Tadley Hill has so many properties within such a small space. Living on Tadley Hill, I know the daily impact I have for myself, other road users and pedestrians when I exit or enter my driveway, especially during rush hours, but also through other times of the day. The applicants attend the site sporadically and have one vehicle each. They are not equivalent to 6 properties, which could be over 14 cars at any time. As I exit my driveway, I fear for any pedestrians that I'm unable to see, not because of mine or their carelessness, but just the positioning of us both. As I try and exit onto the road, especially if I turn right, a kind soul may allow me to cross the road. However, I cannot see what traffic is further up the hill as the queue of traffic inhibits my view. I don't believe in this being reactive. I prefer to be proactive and not allowing accidents to happen in the first place. With regards to a loss of privacy, even with any site visits you may have attended, not one of you came to my house and stood in my living room or my bedroom or my bungalow, or in number 18, who will be totally exposed to the rear of plots 5 and 6 in their entirety. If you deem 6 properties were to go ahead, we ask if there will be a concession to have these 2 plots switched to road facing as the other 4 are, which may go some way to at least alleviating our concerns. I wonder if there was also any consideration to the lay of the land and that our properties also sit considerably lower than those of plots 5 and 6. There has been a large number of objections for a reason and verbally a great deal more. Even the Town Council have stressed their concerns to all I mention, as those of us living in this area can see the reality of the impact in having this number of properties at this actual site. I think we can all agree there is a definite case for 2 properties to be built in place of where one stands, but why remove the area of nature? Sadly, the plot you will have seen on your site visit already vastly reduced in greenery and beehives, those habitats that were once taken during a number of site clearances applicants have undertaken over previous years. I was unable to bring photos with me that showed a once dense, rich environment that we used to watch deer and other animals roam freely around. Instead, the poor deer get stuck in between a large fence our neighbour erected last year.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Want to add that the fence the applicants mentioned in their plans bordering the TPO section doesn't actually exist on that boundary and is on the border of the next plot of land adjoining ours. Residents of Tadley Hill set about proving ownership of the land once we received information about the planning application. As mentioned before, we were all very happy to see this being used by the bees and the chickens. Sadly, to the financial constraints, even with us all working together, we were unable to continue with our claim with the land registry. Again, another example of those with money win and us little people having to sit back and put up. I come here today hoping that you may understand that living with the reality of 6 large family-sized properties on such a busy stretch of road can only cause more problems that it will solve. But I sadly do not think our concerns will be heard, more likely just shrugged off because this application ticks boxes and provides houses the borough is much in need of. As I mentioned at the start, yes, we need houses, but we need houses for people that are affordable and in place that are in a safe, residential, pedestrian for all users of roads. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Questions for the Speaker? No? Thank you very much. No questions? If you return to your other seat, thank you. And next speaker is Mr. Cobbold. Evening, Mr. Cobbold. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll start with what the previous speaker finished on. Yes, we need houses. This is a site which is in the settlement boundary of Tadley. Tadley is as we've heard with the debate on the previous application, a site, or a town I should say, which has not taken its fair share of development over the years, despite what we've just said, because of the AWE giving artificial, should I use that word? Yeah, probably, artificial protection to it and stopping developments coming forward. This is a development which is in principle acceptable, and I find it strange that objectors and the town council, have an issue with the development of the site and are trying to push it down to a smaller development. I'm going to deal with their concerns. That's probably the best way to deal with it. Highways, we've just heard concerns about highway safety. HCC have looked at the 2 access points to the site. They've considered the speed of the road outside. They've considered the visibility. They've said it's acceptable for both of the proposed entrances. Obviously, 30 miles an hour is the least visibility requirement, I should say. And we've even heard from the town council that they've got concern about the density of traffic at school times. That just slows traffic down, so that makes it safer rather than less safe. So I think we can assume in an urban area that 6 new houses where you've got a road going right through the town with accesses and private drives, etc., either side of it, I don't think that's going to have an impact on highway safety. The town council made a point as well about demand for 2-bedroom houses and bungalows in the settlement. I think this is a sort of way of pushing us towards a reduced development on the site, not least because they then subsequently say, just as we've heard, the site's suitable for 2 houses. So what we're talking about, two small bungalows on the site with 2 bedrooms. We know the housing need. We know the requirements in the borough as a whole for new houses. We're having rural parishes approving new houses on greenfield land outside of settlement boundaries to help with the housing numbers. And yet here we are being told, well, actually, we've got this site in Tadley, which we can get a couple of small bungalows on it. We did start at 8 houses on this site. We've reduced it to 6 to improve the development with the officer's recommendations. And that helps the street scene. It pushes development back on the site, and it all fits comfortably, making best use of the available land. We've heard about overlooking 18 and 18A Tadley Hill. They're the properties to the north, are the ones quoted by the town council, and I think that's what I picked up from the previous speaker. They're separated from the application site itself by a 20-metre buffer zone with trees on it, full of mature trees, I should say. There you go. And even without these trees, the face-to-face distance between the proposed properties and those existing ones you can see in the background, we're talking a good 30 plus metres. I can't see how overlooking is an issue. Town council talk about affordable housing. We've heard more about affordable housing again and the need for it. That's wonderful, but we're below the threshold here. There can't be any suggestions we've deliberately got it below the threshold, given that we've been squeezed from 8 to 6 houses in our negotiations with officers. It's still below the threshold for affordable housing, and all we can do is apply the policy and advise our clients on that policy. So I'll conclude to say it's development in an area, built-up area of the town, where new houses should be encouraged and hasn't recently due to the AWE restrictions. We have a proposal which would not have an adverse impact on the existing emergency plan. We've heard how you need to go with the advice of the emergency planners. So I think this is one you should be welcoming and approving. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for Mr. Cobbold? No, I have none. Thank you very much. And if we could have Councillor Carruthers. Good evening, Councillor. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Good evening, councillors. As a child, my father used to have allotments, and so I spent a lot of time growing up in and around the area in which the proposal site falls. In those days, the land, which is proposed to be built on today, was a piece of well-established native woodland. Back then, the land wasn't known to belong to anybody in particular, and it complemented the allotments, providing a haven for wildlife and insects. Sadly, over the last decade, I have seen this woodland disappear as the land has been gradually cleared of many of its trees. My father was a councillor when the land was fenced off by the applicants, and then the beehives arrived. He questioned the ownership of the land, which seemed to be being gradually fenced in and possessed, and I understand that there has continued to be a question over the ownership of this land amongst local folk. Land registry is, of course, a separate matter to the planning which we have in front of us, but I'd still like to mention this. Unfortunately, much of the woodland is now history. However, this site remains a valuable green space. As a councillor, I agree that we have the need for more homes in Tadley, but I do not believe that this is the right space or the right houses. We need a mix of homes to include affordable homes, and we need homes with safe access that do not destroy what is left of our green spaces. Every day for the last 11 years, I've made the journey to Tadley School with my children, often travelling up past this stretch of the A340, both on foot and in a car. I've watched as this stretch of road has become increasingly congested. At rush hour times, the roundabout close to the site queues from all directions as people try to make their way towards Basingstoke or Aldermaston or across Tadley to one of the local schools. In Tadley, we are hugely impacted at rush hour by the AWE, and of course the A340 is the main route in and out. When you do make it over the roundabout to pass the proposal site, during busy times of day you will then often creep up the hill in a queue of traffic. This road is the main bus route that carries stagecoach buses and school buses. These buses don't fully fit into the bus lay-by that you approach as you leave Tadley. With a constant flow of traffic coming towards Tadley during the busy times, this combined with the traffic lights that are in frequent use in this location around school start and finish times, and the people turning right into the Tadley school site, means the traffic in rush hour is often solid along the stretch of road towards Basingstoke on which we propose to build 6 new homes. I grew up in a house on the west side of the A340, just over the road and up a little from the proposed site. I lived close to the traffic lights. During rush hour, my family would go out and press the traffic lights before jumping back in the car in order to be able to pull out onto the road without sitting for a very long time trying to wait for a gap. Of course, when the traffic lights did allow us to pull out, we then had to be aware of passing walkers making their way to the school or bus stop, as it was easy to focus only on the traffic when we had been sat there intently looking for a gap or focused on the lights.
You have 1 minute remaining.
But we were one house. This development will have 6 houses. To access local amenities and facilities in Tadley, people living on this development will need to turn right out of their access road. But there are no traffic lights here, and this is at a point where people have just come over the roundabout and are likely to be speeding up the hill. I believe that this is going to make the road more dangerous for both pedestrians and drivers, including the residents of this development. The pavements are narrow, and people walk up this section of road to access the bus stops and school. I feel this development is being squeezed into a section of land which is surrounded on one side by properties, and although the recommendation suggests that the privacy of these existing houses is not affected, having looked closely at the site, I do not believe that this is the case, and the residents who live in the immediate vicinity certainly disagree. I reiterate, I would like to see more houses built in Tadley to meet the needs of Tadley residents that we do know are there. But I do not believe this is the right approach, the right site or the right houses. I'm sad to see what was previously a beautiful woodland and in a site which I feel is unsuitable being considered for development. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Councillor Carruthers? Councillor McCormack, followed by Councillor Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. Just really on the highway safety, have you actually been on the site and seen the proposed visibility? And you know, when we went, it was kind of difficult to see, but it looked like it might be made safe. But I don't know what your take would be on that, because you were very strongly opposed to it on safety grounds.
I would disagree that it will be a safe access. I think people coming from in quieter times, I think people will be accelerating up that hill. I do not feel that there is going to be good visibility. Obviously, the access isn't there yet, so I can only stand at the site. But no, I don't feel it is. No.
Councillor Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. Could you expand a bit on the disputed land, because I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with the site, obviously, apart from the paperwork. So, the land dispute. Well, what's that about?
I can't really elaborate other than to tell you that in the past, I know that it was something that was being contested, and that there was some question over whether the applicants were actually the owners of the land.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Councillor Carruthers. I just want to just pick up on Councillor McCormick's question about highway safety. Okay, and you've discussed traffic coming up the hill, leaving the roundabout. Okay, but you haven't said anything about traffic coming from the Allen's Garage over the crest. Okay, and accelerating down the hill. I used to be a resident of Tadley. Okay, and that was always known as an accident black spot around Swedish houses. And I just want to know, from your experience, of living just over the road or on that road, how you've obviously mentioned the traffic coming up. What about the traffic going down?
There's solid traffic in both directions at a certain time of day. Because we have the AWE, you have a number of people coming into Tadley to work from the Basingstoke direction. So what I was trying to explain about the buses is that what happens is there are certain times of day between sort of 8:30 and 9 where that stretch between the roundabout and the traffic lights is solid. And one of the reasons is that when people are getting towards the traffic lights and the bus, when they get towards the bus stop, they can't pass the buses because there's a solid traffic coming in the other direction. So therefore, same with cyclists, anything like that, you can't pass at that point in the day because people are continually coming from Basingstoke. So it's absolutely both directions at that time of day and at busier times.
Thank you, Chair.
Any more questions for the councillor? No? Thank you very much. Sorry, Councillor McCormick.
Yeah, it's more about appropriate design and siting, really. I mean, we've got drawings in front of us, and we went to the viewing, and what we could see in the viewing was a load of beehives. But what's the likely impact of this going to be? I mean, you've got houses on the other side of the road. But if it's going to have a visual impact, that would be cause for concern.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, currently it's a field with beehives in. There's going to be houses. What's going to be the impact on the surrounding area?
As far as I can see from the road side, it's not going to have an awful lot of impact. I think from the surrounding properties, I think it certainly could have and will have an impact, particularly when you look at the fact that the ground is not flat there. And I think when you're stood over at the allotment side, again, it's going to have quite a visual impact. At the moment, you look across and you can just see a space, really. Obviously, you're going to see houses. So from one side, it will definitely have a visual impact. I think a negative one, but that's my view.
Thank you. No more questions? Thank you very much. Questions to officers? No? Councillor Freeman.
Again, it's on the land dispute. Were we aware that the land was in dispute? Has that been cleared up at all?
Thank you, Councillor. So ownership of land in itself isn't necessarily a planning issue. This correct notification process has been gone through from a planning application point of view, as explained within the officer report on 111. So a certificate B notice was served on the landowners of registry, and that was submitted to us as part of the application process, and that was considered to be sufficient. So yes, it wasn't. We were aware of it because of the representations received, but yeah, the application's gone through the correct process in terms of notification and certificates.
Okay, so does that mean that somebody can make an application to build on land that they don't actually own? And you could stick a house on it? That's ridiculous. I'm sorry.
You can't put a house on it.
I'll talk to you about that one separately.
Just to follow up on that, Councillor, yes, so they could apply to build, but they need then permission to actually carry out the work. So yes, you can apply for permission where you like, as long as you go through the correct process.
Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. It's more a question of access, because I think this is something those of us who saw the site would have a concern about. How far back should the gates be set for safe access? Because when we were on site, it didn't look like there was very much room at all, and cars would have to get virtually to the road's edge to be able to see out.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'm not sure if you're talking about the gates existing on the site. As part of the proposal, there aren't any gates proposed, and as part of the verbal update, a new condition is being recommended to avoid any gates being across the access. Typically, if there were to be gates, which is not the case here, is we like them set back about 6 metres from the carriageway edge. But in this instance, the proposed accesses don't have any gates and aren't proposed to, and there's a condition in place to control them.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Page 100, sorry to harp on about this, but the emergency planners, again, their comments, I'm a little confused by what they actually have said in terms of how this paragraph reads. It's suggesting it's a significant burden. And then, was that from the ONR, or who was it from? Because we've then got HCC said, providing they got a telephone line or something. Did West Berkshire say anything? It doesn't sort of read as the previous application in terms of consultees' comments. It's a little bit, I'd like to understand it more. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So the sector report highlights the comments received by the emergency planners. I believe it was West Berkshire for this one. And yes, they did set out that they did have some concerns, but they're not objecting to this proposal, and that was supported by the ONR on the basis of their standing advice. So yes, in terms of clarity, they did raise some concerns, but they're not objecting to the proposal, subject to a telephone line being in place on a condition in that regard. We considered the condition. We don't think it's necessary in planning terms, hence why there's no condition in place for it. But in speaking to them again today, they hadn't raised any concerns following those further discussions.
Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to move on to page 110, please, where the report mentions contaminated land. And I'd just like clarification. Okay, is the land contaminated or is it not contaminated? Because it seems to be quite a binary thing, and to be considered potentially contaminated or not, I find a bit wishy-washy. So I'd like to try and understand a little bit more, okay, and to also have a little bit more clarity. Is it contaminated or is it not contaminated? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that forms part of the Environmental Health Officer's sort of concerns or hesitation. We're not sure at the moment, hence their recommendation for conditions to find out. That in their search of the historic maps and from their records, they couldn't see a contamination source on the site, but it can't be ruled out due to the need for underground works to take place. So they've suggested a condition to seek if there is contamination, and if there is, what can be done to correct it, to make it acceptable, so that they're quite content with a condition for contamination and then subsequent verification on the site.
Any more questions for officers? No, in that case, debate. Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I wasn't on the site visit on Friday, but it's the old chestnut. At the start, there were two outstanding comments from biodiversity and HCC highways. Subsequently, highways have received that additional information, and we've had it so many times on planning that if HCC highways have no objection, albeit with some conditions, it's extremely difficult for this committee to ignore their opinion, frustrating as that may be.
Yeah. Anyone else on debate? Councillor McCormack, followed by Councillor Frost.
Chair, I'm minded to refuse it on the highways access issues because that seems to be a recurring theme. Those of us who visited the site could see it for what it is. We've had the ward councillor mention it, we've had residents mention it. In terms of the highways authority, well, looking at it this way, those of us who know Tadley Hill, when I go down there on a daily basis when I go to work, know how bunged up it can get in the morning. There's a school off the top of the hill, there's a swimming pool at the bottom of the hill with a roundabout. I just think that if we have another couple of access roads there, that's going to make things even worse than they are. It congests at the drop of a hat. There's also acceleration down the hill. You know, it's actually looking at the, when we're on the site, I mean, that to me was the defining moment, that looking at how difficult it was to see out. Admittedly, we were on foot, but when you're on foot, you actually get better visibility than when you're behind the wheel of a car. So I would be inclined to turn it round and say that it's contrary to policies CN9 and EM10, based on the parking arrangements and visibility and highway safety. And it is a marginal thing. Obviously, the comments from Hampshire Highways don't help, but I just can't help thinking we would have all sorts of problems, not least with people also parking on the road, if there were any issues trying to get inside where the 6 houses are.
I'm taking that as a move for refusal. Is there a seconder? Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I am minded to second the motion, having lived in Tadley for 24 and a half years. Okay, it was always this part of the A340 I always used to do my utmost to avoid. Okay, at the school times. I'm really torn on this, okay, application, but I've come down on the side of refusal on the grounds that Councillor McCormack has put forward for his motion, and I'm delighted to second it. However, reluctantly, okay, I will second it, but you know, I know that Tadley needs houses, okay, desperately, but and I know we need to challenge the DEPZ, okay, and this I thought could potentially be a site where we could do it, but not with on the grounds of highway safety, which is the motion that's been put forward for refusal. So I'm reluctantly, with heavy heart, you know, I agree to second this, okay, and second the motion proposed.
Thank you, Councillor Frost. Councillor Freeman, you had your hand up?
It was just to second the motion, but again, we've heard from ward councillors that it's quite an accident black spot anyway. To add even a few more houses into the mix is going to make it a lot worse. I'd have been happy to second the motion as well.
Councillor Hussey.
I assume everybody's familiar with the HCC comments. On page 106, penultimate paragraph, it says quite clearly, the potential traffic generation from the development is also considered acceptable, whereby the proposal would not have a severe detrimental impact on the operations, etc. And condition 20, to satisfy HCC, clearly states the dimensions for the access roads and displays. So to use those against the advice of HCC as a reason for refusal, based on what Councillor Houghton said just a few minutes ago, I can't support it, and I don't see how any member can support it unless we are saying that our experts, HCC, don't know what they're talking about.
Thank you. For myself, I agree with Councillor Hussey. I think the reason for refusal is very dangerous. I know that piece of road very well, and it will increase congestion on that piece of road, but I don't think it will compromise road safety. I think somebody said earlier, if the traffic is going slower, it makes it safer, and there is that point. So I will take Councillor Freeman and then we will go to the vote. Councillor Freeman.
Thank you. The report actually says that the highways officer considers that visibility displays should be provided, and it's considered that it can be secured by way of condition. It didn't say that it could be provided, it said it should, and it needed a condition. So I'd still support the motion.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded for refusal. Those in favour of refusal? I make that 4. And those against refusal? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8. I'll make that 8. Right. The motion is therefore lost. We now need another motion. Would somebody like to put another motion? Councillor Hussey. Could you put your mic on, please?
I'm proposing we accept the officer's recommendation for approval.
Thank you. And is there a seconder? Councillor Court. Been moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And those against? Surprisingly 4. Thank you. That is approved. Philip.
Thank you, Chair. The application is approved as outlined for the following reasons as outlined on the officer's report and the conditions listed at the end. Thank you.
Item number 3, 12 Tadley Hill. Tadley. Bethan.
So this is an application at Tadley Hill. The proposal is for the erection of one dwelling, which would be positioned to the south of an existing property with access obtained to its southern boundary along Swedish houses. There is an update on page 4 of the update paper to amend condition 10. This was to refer to one single property and its curtilage as opposed to properties and their curtilages. The application is recommended for approval, subject to conditions located at the end of the report on pages 147 to 150 of the agenda.
Thank you, Bethan. We have one speaker, Mr. Cotterill. Good evening once again, Mr. Cotterill. You have 4 minutes, and I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
All right, thank you very much. Oh yeah, he's good. Oh. Right, yeah, good evening. So in terms of this application and uncharacteristic for me, I don't really want to say too much other than, in the way this has gone tonight, Hampshire County Council, Highways point of view, no objection. Waste management, no objection. Hampshire County Council in terms of the emergency planning, no objection. Environmental health, I'm sure you can work out where this is going, no objection. O&R, no objection. Biodiversity, no objection. So in terms of the way that the officer has actually approached to this application, I believe that the officer has covered everything off. So again, it's a very good report. Ruth's done a very good job. It's covered everything. There's the one concern there that people were talking about is Swedish houses, and the way that lane actually is. There's only 4 houses that are actually on Swedish houses, and the host dwelling actually uses an existing access out onto Swedish houses. So, in terms of the trip generation, as was stated earlier, Hampshire County Council have said it's not of significance and no objection. So I don't really know what else I can say other than no objections. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Cotterill? No? Thank you very much. In that case, we have no other speakers. Questions to officers? No? No questions for officers? Good. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I just noticed on the plans for this item that the access is onto Swedish houses. As I understand this is an unadopted road. Okay. How do officers feel about creating access onto what is already an unadopted road?
So it is unadopted and it is out of our control, but again, Highways have raised no objections given it's an existing access onto that main Tadley Hill. So really, it's one dwelling, and the scale of development wouldn't really warrant us to get to substantiate a refusal.
Thank you. Any other questions for the officers? No. In that case, debate. No debate. In that, Councillor McCormick.
Move the recommendation.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor McCormick, seconded by Councillor Harvey. Those in favour of? And great, that's everybody. Thank you.
So the application has been approved subject as per the officer's recommendation in the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 4, land adjacent Cottage Farm, New Road, Pamber Green, Tadley.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is an application at land adjacent to Cottage Farm, New Road, Pamber Green. The proposal is for the erection of a single-storey 3-bedroom dwelling following demolition of the stable blocks. The dwelling would be sited fronting New Road with a parking area to the front and private garden to the rear. There's no update since the agenda's been prepared, and the application is recommended for approval subject to conditions located at the end of the report on pages 174 and 177 of the agenda.
Thank you. If we could have our first speaker, which is Mr. Greaves. Do we have a Mr. Greaves here? No. In that case, in support, Mr. Cobbold. Evening once again, Mr. Cobbold. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, guys, me again. Let's hope the familiarity doesn't breed contempt. But so what do I have to say on this one? It's a pleasant site. It's on the edge of the built-up area, far from being isolated. Pamber Green is all but in local plan designation a settlement. It's recently been established, plenty of planning permissions, as the Parish Council has said, for accommodating new houses in a sustainable manner. Indeed, there are 2 approvals right next to this site, just to the west of it, where houses have been approved, one through the conversion of an outbuilding and one on the same basis as this for the replacement of stables under SS6 previously developed land argument. This proposed development continues the style and type of development along the road, which is prevalent to, well, actually to the north and south of New Road here. Family houses in reasonable sized plots with private parking, good size and quality amenity space. A couple of things for the Parish Council I'll deal with, and the third party objections. One is some concept raised as it being green space. This isn't a planning definition. Local green space, I suppose, is. That's in the MPPF, but I don't think Basingstoke have any local green space designations, certainly not in this area that I'm aware of. Moreover, by being previously developed land, it's obviously brownfield land rather than greenfield land. It's flood zone 1, it's upstream of the critical drainage area, and therefore we've done the duly obliged flood risk assessment. It doesn't suggest that there's any issue with flooding or drainage of any issue. The drainage on the site has been fully addressed, and this has been accepted on those 2 sites I mentioned previously to the west as well. The other consistent objection is our old friend, which we've just talked about, highways impact. This is 1 dwelling on the highway, taking on average, I'm going to say, 1 movement every few hours, not grounds for refusing a planning application in isolation, let alone in the context of a previously developed land which used to have, or still does have vehicles and horse boxes, etc. going to it. It's more than capable of accommodating the site. Final point the Parish Council raises the question of local need. I assume that's in reference to the SS6 allowance for development of sites in the countryside when local need is demonstrated, but that obviously overlooks the previously developed land argument as a different strain of SS6. And that is what this is being justified and recommended for approval on. Clearly the massive need for houses is still there. Whilst it's only a single dwelling, hopefully this will enable you to tick one more of the target off. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Cobbold? No. Thank you very much, Mr. Cobbold. In that case, questions to officers. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just confirm that condition 7 as recommended, I think page 175, is condition 7 removal of permitted development rights? So I'd read that through the jargon.
Yes, yes it is.
Any more questions to officers? Councillor Gaskell.
Yeah, in the public observations, obviously there's 57 letters of objection, which is quite considerable. But bullet point 3, it says the land is dangerous for pedestrians and cyclists. Could you just clarify why it is dangerous?
I think that's referring to no street lighting or pavements, but that's not uncommon for rural areas like this, and new housing has been approved down the road, particularly namely next door to the site. So I think that's what they're referring to.
Any more questions? In that case, debate. In that case, I will move it from the chair, as per the officer recommendation. Is there a seconder? Councillor Frost. Moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? And that is unanimous. Bethan.
Thank you. So the application is approved as per the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Bethan. Right. Item number 5, the Red House, London Street, Whitchurch. Philip.
Thank you, Chair. Item number 5, which can be found on page 184 of tonight's agenda, is a full application for the change of use of an existing building from public house, restaurant and residential accommodation to 2 numbered dwellings, erection of a single-storey rear extension to replace the existing, associated internal alterations, car parking and landscaping. The application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions listed at the end of the officer's report. Thank you.
And if we could have our first speaker, which is Councillor John Buckley. Good evening, Councillor Buckley. You have 4 minutes. We'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining, and the microphone button is on the deck in front of you. You found it. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go back to 2015. The owners stated that the Red House had seen a dramatic increase in turnover and that it was a victim of its own success. An application for houses on the car park promised 100% of the land value would be reinvested into the Red House to help fund improvements and modernisation. They stated their scheme, developed with Basingstoke planners, protects and secures the future of a Red House as a listed building, a community asset and a business. Permission was granted, the houses were built and sold, so what changed? Promises were not kept. Deterioration set in, creating quite a lot of local anger. The community and social value, developed over 300 years, was literally crumbling away. Each proprietor of a public house is only the custodian of those values, not the owner. Neighbourhood plans help to protect community assets and values, which its residents invested heavily in their plan and trust it to do so. Basingstoke should uphold that trust, and having worked with the owner who said the scheme would protect and secure the pub's future. This application fails to recognise an option of alternative uses to retain a community facility, such as mixed use, perhaps with a smaller licensed element, maybe with some retail and some residential, even though such a suggestion has been made to the owner and has worked elsewhere. This fails Neighbourhood Plan Policy GD3, protection of assets of community value and other community facilities. It was not just a public house. It supported the local economy, providing employment, not just staff, but many local tradespeople, who then contributed back into the local economy. It provided social opportunities combating isolation and loneliness, along with activities ranging from charity fundraising to christenings. It's an asset of community value, And as the town is targeted for housing growth, retention of social infrastructure is imperative. A change of use would be against policy GD3, which recognises the importance of assets of community value and other community facilities. As a destination, it attracted visitors who brought trade to the rest of the town. This goes against GD8, which highlights the importance of increasing prosperity by encouraging tourism, particularly in rural areas, and GD5, which refers to the importance of retaining economic vibrancy and vitality for the town centre.
You have 1 minute remaining.
There has been limited marketing and offers refused. It fails on GD6 as it's not been shown it's no longer economically viable. It might be under a different owner. As the application fails on several neighbourhood plan policies, Whitchurch Town Council strongly objects and asks that it be refused. Regarding listed building consent, a full independent building assessment should be provided with a full schedule of works and materials to ensure its historical integrity. Without this, an open door is left for uncontrolled changes. The history of actions to date do not inspire confidence. Listed building consent should also be refused. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you turn your microphone off, please? Thank you. Questions for the councillor? Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. So would it be fair to say, having visited the pub at the viewing, that considerable, notwithstanding it's a listed building, considerable investment is required in this building, but that there is a community need and demand for it, so it could be a viable prospect going forward? And on that note, what would you like to see this building being used for in the future?
Could you put your microphone on, please?
I would say that yes, there is a need for it, and certainly a wish for it, from the nearly 400 objections that went in. I do believe it would take considerable investment. There are other public houses that have been in reasonably similar situations that have been developed in different ways, that have incorporated different uses, mixed uses, and I gave the example of perhaps retaining a small licensed area, a retail area, and accommodation.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. Thank you very much, councillor. And our next speakers are Mr. Wade and Mrs. Winch. Good evening, Mrs. Winch. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Amanda, and I speak on behalf of the Red Not Dead House Facebook group, the Red House Whitchurch Community Pub CBS, and the Whitchurch community. Much of the resistance to this planning application is in the disingenuous nature of how this situation has come about. In 2015, planning permission by the same applicants agreed the build of 3 houses on the car park of the pub with the proviso that the money gained from the selling of the land would be reinvested into the Red House. The applicant stated that, over the last 4 years, the business has seen a dramatic increase in turnover, proving that the Red House has a potential to remain as a pub and a restaurant serving the community for many years to come. 100% of the land value achieved is to be used to fund the improvements and modernisation of the Red House. This positioning was believed by the community, quelling objections. Whilst the houses have been built and sold, not 1 penny was spent on the refurbishment. So, is this a facility no longer needed? The community site dedicated to saving the Red House has almost 1,000 active supporters. We undertook a survey and over 90% of the respondents agreed that a pub with garden is of significant value to the community. 2 new scale housing estates have been built in Whitchurch and it continues to grow. Overton is half the size and has 4 pubs offering food daytime and evening. Whitchurch now only has 2. The Overton and Whitchurch pubs are all thriving. The Red House is the only town centre pub with parking spaces for more than 15 cars, potential for EV charging sockets and a large child-friendly garden. An approval of this planning would rob the town of a much-needed community asset. I am pleased that the planning officer agrees that the applicant has not demonstrated that the facility is no longer needed. It clearly is. Now, regarding viability, it is here where the applicant has had a U-turn on previous planning claims. The community group seeking to purchase the Red House commissioned the comprehensive MJ Hughes report included in this application. This report states that the property was marketed above market rate. That from our investigations and meeting with the community group and our experience of over 30 years in the licensed trade, it is possible to see that there is a sustainable business for the pub. The applicant themselves claims that the pub did have periods of being popular and that its success is viable with the right staff and good management. A key point here is that purposeful deterioration should not be used to prove unviability. There is no doubt that the Red House lost trade in the last few years, but this was by their own hands. From 2012 to the temporary closure in 2018, the general condition of the interior and exterior was one of deterioration. No repairs made on peeling paint, mould, or the rundown exterior. I also note that the pub did not close due to unviability. Trade was not lost, it was halted. The applicant's final Facebook statement in October 2018 said the main reason the pub closed temporarily was due to the necessary refurbishment work on the toilets and kitchen. Any claim by the applicant of unviability is after the fact and a disingenuous trick to support their planning application.
You have 1 minute remaining.
The other issue of viability is the sincerity and feasibility of a community bid to purchase the Red House for $350,000. This was rejected as below asking price. It is clear that the asking price of $475,000 was set to dissuade interest. I note the most recent sale price was $300,000. On to the overage clause, not mentioned in the planning application or in the Florets report. The applicant blatantly admitted to this clause, stating that if they intended to run a successful community pub, then an overage clause would not have mattered. This is deliberately misleading and ignores the circumstances. This clause derailed a comprehensive business plan, which otherwise would have been funded by a mix of community shares, community loans, and a commercial loan. All banks' approach would not approve a commercial loan with this clause in place. It was bound to kill off any deal. The business was on the market for 2 years only, 8 months in a pandemic, overpriced, with an overage clause making bank support impossible. In summary, this application has been built on fabricated half-truths and failed promises. It clearly does not satisfy any of the planning criteria and should be rejected. Losing such a core and historic part of town when it is growing so much and in need of facilities like this would be a short-sighted mistake. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for Mrs Winch? Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. So you mentioned that there's 3 houses that were built on the site of part of the Cub Parker, and when we went there, London Road obviously is hideously afflicted with parking issues. How is a pub going to operate if it has a very limited parking in an area that has parking problems? Would you expect people to be walking to and from the pub and hardly anybody driving there? Because I think that would be a really key consideration in terms of it continuing as a pub.
So when the community were looking to purchase the pub, we had a lot of conversations with the owner. Even with the houses being built on the current piece of land, there's still 15 spaces remaining for the pub, which is actually considerably bigger than any other pub in town. Most of the other pubs in town have actually taken over their outside space through COVID and now use it as kind of hospitality areas. And so I think the White Hart now only has 5 spaces, so it will still have by far the biggest parking of any pub in town. And actually, it used to operate fine as a pub, and it didn't have any issues on the local area, so I don't see why that would be an issue.
Thank you. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. So, if we tonight did refuse this application, what do you think the community could do to make it happen? Because I guess the applicant is not going to just carry on and put it back as a pub. So what plans, is it realistic that the community could come to its rescue?
So we had a full business plan in play, and the offer was genuine. When we put it through, it was rejected on the basis of it being below asking price. We later found out about the overage clause, which also derailed us on another area. The community is still much behind the pub, and there's an awful appetite in town to make sure we can save it. If the property was to come back on the market at an asking price that was nearer the 350,000 mark that we offered, which we think is reasonable, in fact, it's deteriorated as a property far more in the last 2 years, and the overage clause was not a thing, then absolutely the community buy could still be an option. I also note, fellow councillors will be speaking later, but there has been renewed interest in town from 2 other very credible local businessmen seeking to potentially move in to buy the property. And so there are other options on there. It hasn't been on the market for a long time.
Yeah. I see no more hands up. Councillor Harvey.
Could I just ask, in terms of the community asset and the value element to it, why is this so important to the community in Whitchurch? What is it about this pub? You have other choices, obviously, but what is it about the Red House that has just generated this level of interest in the community?
I think there's 2 things here. I moved to Whitchurch about 15 years ago, and there were like 7 pubs when I moved there in the centre of town alone, and there were far more before that. They seem to be dwindling all the time. We have a very limited now amount of pubs compared to local villages and towns nearby. And I think the Red House particularly, it has heritage. It was much, much loved by many people because it's quirky, it's different. It had an awful lot of people that considered it as their local, and it's been missed ever since. And I just don't think that we have other pubs in town. They're all doing really well. They're thriving. You can't get into them, some of them on a Friday night. There's plenty of room for the Red House to exist, and people would welcome it back. It's one of our kind of flagship establishments in the town. It's really missed.
Yeah. I've got a couple of questions of my own. One, you just said there were 7 pubs in the town a little while ago and more before that, and that's now reduced considerably. Why do you think these other pubs have failed? And you say the pubs that are there are full on a Friday night. What are they like the other nights? Because a pub can't survive on one night a week. Why have the other pubs failed?
I wouldn't like to speak for all of the pubs in town. I do know that I frequent the pubs a lot, and they are busy on most nights of the week. Obviously, it's slightly quieter on the Monday, Tuesdays, as you'd expect, but the pubs and the establishments in town are busy. As to why the other pubs closed, each pub has a different story. It would be wrong for me to make an assumption that it's because of one thing or another. One at the railway, will have very different reasons for closure to the Harvest Home, which is the other end of town. The pubs were spread all over. I don't think that's any indication of pubs not being viable at all.
Thank you. Councillor Gaskell.
So can I ask the pubs that have closed down, what are they now?
So the railway inn is now housing. The Harvest Home is now housing. I'm trying to think of the pubs before that closed. I don't think those are the 2 that primarily would spring to mind. And yeah, both were turned into small housing developments.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. Thank you very much. And if we could have Gary Martin and Rebecca Jubb. Good evening to you. You have 4 minutes between you, and I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Okay. I'm going to do the initial presentation, but Gary is here as the applicant to answer any questions if needed. Applicant's agent, sorry, to answer any questions. But really, what I just want to summarise is my first involvement in this property was actually in 2014. And we subsequently applied for the planning application for the 3 houses in 2016, which got the planning permission for those in 2016. And it was absolutely fully the intention of the applicant at that time to reinvest any money raised from that development back into the pub. But during that period of the 4 years of building and selling those houses, a lot changed. The final house was sold in September 2020, and obviously you'll all be aware of what happened in those few months leading up to that point. very difficult market, very difficult situation to finish the development, very difficult situation with cost of materials and labour, etc. The pub closed in October 2018, and subsequently there was over 2 years of marketing. That is over 4 times the requirement that the council's guidance note has. And we subsequently took an instruction that actually the marketing had failed. Florette said we cannot continue to market it, it just makes us look bad, we know we're never going to be able to sell it, we need to stop and you need to do something else. We made a pre-application request in March 21 and finally made the application for this scheme in November 21. The applicant always intended to run the building as a pub. That's what they purchased it for. They've taken many years trying to make it work. And they have not deliberately run it into the ground. There's a lack of local support. If there was truly local support, they would have been spending money in that pub, and they weren't. The ownership details and the change of situation and finances over the time has all been transparently provided. The previous speaker made reference to a spurious interest of one person we're aware of that has suggested they might want to buy it and open a butcher's shop, but that's not a pub. That's not going to return it to a pub. And we've got no suggestion that that's actually a serious interest. It's just something that's come up to try and derail this application. We really just want to say to you, what do you actually want to happen to this building? It was originally built as 2 houses. We're proposing a sympathetic conversion. The only opportunity we can see to secure the optimum viable use for the building going forward, to protect its heritage, to protect its status as a listed building, and ensure that it is maintained and protected in the future. We've got conditions in place to secure a schedule of works, as was requested by the councillor earlier. All of the conditions on the planning permission and the listed building consent cover all of the things that are required. This was a community asset, but it was neglected by the community, which led to its decline. The asset of community value listing has expired. We fulfilled all of the requirements of that, and it did not result in any actual proceedable interest from any purchaser. Nobody else has wanted to buy it to take it forward. There's nothing more we can do. We have explored all the options, we've fulfilled all of the policy requirements, and your officers are recommending approval of the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the speakers, if you don't mind, I'll start the ball rolling. You said a minute ago that you had an interest from a gentleman who wanted to turn it into a butcher's shop. I spoke to that gentleman yesterday. That offer is still open to you. Can you explain why you're not going forward or not actually pursuing that sort of line?
I'll answer that question. I spoke to Rupert on the Monday, and that's the first contact that I've had from him. He states that he tried to make contact with me previously, but that was not the case as far as I'm aware. He was very vague about his intentions. He said he was looking at it as a to complement his butchery shop that he has. He kept referring to it as a development, which was confusing to me because he never once mentioned it as a pub, I couldn't get a sense of what he was actually trying to achieve. It was a very strange conversation. I gave him the option to come and look at the building for himself on today, because I was actually away Monday and Tuesday. I wasn't in Whitchurch, and he declined that offer to come and view the building so he could get it, because he said he couldn't confirm to me that he had an interest in it without doing more investigation. And I said, well, the first thing you need to do is to come in and have a look at the building. And he declined that offer on the basis he was too busy today because he had a planning officer coming to see him about something he was doing. I'm also aware that planning officer attended his premises yesterday, as it happens. So I honestly don't know.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was there with the planning officer yesterday. Anyway, any questions from anybody else? Councillor Harvey.
I just got one real question based upon what you said. The community neglected the Red House, was what you said, and there has been no interest from the community in saving it, is what you said. How do I square that with the sheer volume of objection, the parish, the town council, the 3 ward councillors, and the volume of voice that has been given to us as the planning committee? There is the exact contrary position to the very words you just used. And how could the community have neglected the building when it's not theirs in the first place, because you won't sell it to them? So I'm just trying to understand the context of the words you've used in your representation to us this evening.
I'll answer that, Councillor. The whole of my last 13 years' involvement with the Red House has been a trial of tribulations, and we engaged with the community group in great detail. I opened the doors to them, I gave them every piece of information. I encouraged them to try and buy the premises, because what the overage clause that they speak about was actually a standard overage that I said we would put on any sale to anybody, because it was an uplift of 90% of the of any increase in value if there was any residential development to the site. It was strictly aimed during that process to make sure that the pub stayed as a pub. Now, the community group were very vocal against having that as a condition, yet they want it as a pub. So I don't quite understand why they were so vocal against it. However, they came to us after a period of complete quietness with an unexpected, out of the blue letter that arrived on the last day of the ACV monetarium period, making an offer of £350,000. It had conditions attached to the offer that meant we would have to spend somewhere around about £100,000 to £150,000 before they would buy it. So we're netting the offer back to 200 to 250. They also didn't have any funding in place. They told me that they would only enter into the deal if we agreed to take it off the market and give them exclusivity contract for 6 months while they tried to find some money. They also told us that they couldn't raise the money to do the full building survey that they needed to do to be able to take the next step forward with their offer. And I did everything I could to try to facilitate it for them. We haven't run the building down. Why would anybody do that? We've lost a fortune, myself and various other investors over the time, in the Red House. And if it had been a viable business, it would still be there. And it just failed. There are so many reasons for that, but they are, unfortunately, a fact.
I think it's also worth bearing in mind the Bruton Knowles report, which has been commissioned by the Planning Department to test all of the evidence that we've provided. We've provided extensive information about every aspect of the business and the history of it. And that report has done its own independent assessment, completely outside anything we've had any control over, and concluded that they agree with everything that we've said, that there is no future for this building as a pub. They've tested the sort of financial viability, the business model, the opportunities, and they've agreed that actually its future is in an alternative use.
Thank you. Any more questions? No. Thank you very much. And we have our councillors next. Councillor Williams, Councillor Phillimore and Councillor Ashfield. If we could bring all three of you up together. You have 4 minutes each. So what we'll do the speaking one at a time, and then we'll do all the questions. If that's all right, we'll do all the questions collectively at the end. So, Councillor Williams, you have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Councillor Phillimore is going to lead off.
Fine, Councillor Phillimore, you have 4 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Basingstoke Dean Local Plan Policy EP3 defines Whitchurch as a district centre. The definition of this role is that a district centre should act as a key focus for shopping and other town centre users. These places play a significant role in maintaining and enhancing the prosperity of the town and the wider borough. Therefore, Whitchurch's classification as district centre is based on the amenities and services it has to offer. Whitchurch has delivered houses through the current local plan, distributed through the neighbourhood plan process. It's going to be allocated possibly 310 more through the next local plan, and even more if speculative developers have their way. But as Whitchurch's population has and will grow, what it has to offer has not increased and will be further diminished should we lose this valuable public house and community asset. This is contrary to Basingstoke Dean Policy EM3, which states that any development that would harm the vitality and viability of such a defined centre will not be permitted. Nationally, NPPF paragraph 84D states that decision makers should prioritise the retention and development of accessible local services and facilities. Councillor John Buckley here tonight from Whitchurch Town Council has detailed contradictions to the Whitchurch neighbourhood plan policies. However, there seems little point in entrusting residents to shape their own community with neighbourhood plans and their policies if these policies and the aforementioned local plan policies are ignored. Much has been made of the economic viability of the business, which has also been covered by others and will be in more detail tonight. My observation from experience is that the business operated in the free trade sector of its industry. It was not tied to a brewery or a pub chain or their inflated prices. It was free to buy its products on the open market and maximise potential profit and viability. However, the community never left the support. The pub didn't give the support to the community. Decor and maintenance deteriorated over time, which deterred customer footfall. Whilst the business closed voluntarily long before COVID hit, I assume the business would have benefited from COVID support measures, especially in terms of rates relief. There's no evidence that any of these overhead savings have been expended on the building. As exposed by speakers here tonight, over 400 local objectors, over 900 community group supporters, the campaign for Real Ale, all suggest the Red House is an integral part of the Whitchurch fabric.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Which should revert to its original purpose of serving the community.
Thank you. Who wants to go second? Councillor Ashfield.
Thank you. I'm going to start by picking up on a couple of points that the applicant made just now. He mentioned a condition that was made by the community group to make good some repairs. That was actually, I understand, a condition of when the 3 houses were given permission. It wasn't a new condition. The applicant also mentioned that the community group could not afford a survey. They actually acquired a full RIC survey. It was the overage clause which made any offer impossible for them to deliver. I don't believe the applicant saying that the overage clause was to ensure the Red House remained as a pub. The applicant told me himself last week that if anyone was going to make money out of building the houses, it would be him. Last Friday night, I spent the evening in the King's Arms in Whitchurch. It was really busy. On Saturday night, I couldn't get into the new Bistro 909 because it was full. So I had a drink in the Bell, which was very lively, before being squeezed into the Blue Ginger for a curry. Lots of people were out in large groups and couples. We made it back to 909 for a couple of cocktails after that, but had to sit upstairs because downstairs was full. My point is that there is a very active social scene in Whitchurch. It just requires those businesses to be sensible, innovative and community-minded. Our population has grown and continues to do so. Therefore, in terms of policy CN7, I know that the Red House is needed as a pub. Almost 400 objections should also indicate to the committee that we want the Red House as a pub, not dwellings. At a time when the local plan update will see a minimum of 310 houses being developed for Whitchurch, the argument that there is no practical need for a commercial entity is disingenuous and misleading. Also relevant to CN7, I hope we can all agree that the delivery of 2 dwellings to London Street will not outweigh the benefits of a well-loved local meeting place. The officer has therefore relied on the third part of CN7 as justification for the recommendation. That is that the Red House pub is no longer practical, desirable or viable to retain. It's clear the applicant does not have the desire to run a pub, and it was evident that the applicant did not find it practical to run a pub. But I know that there is genuine desire for the community to run a pub. I also believe there to be credible interest from individuals within Whitchurch to acquire a pub. We've already heard about the first individual that was discussed just now. But very crucially, on Monday this week, 2 days ago, I received a call from a different resident entirely with very genuine interest in buying the pub and leasing it back to the community on a peppercorn basis. I guarantee to this community that this individual is serious and has the means and acumen to deliver. Of course, I can't guarantee that either of these 2 parties will be successful in any bid, but I do believe there's a future for the Red House as a pub. Unfortunately, much of the officer's recommendation has been based on the Bruton Knowles report, a desk-based report completed at arm's length from the Whitchurch I live in.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Reliance on this report has led to an error in judgment. It's clear that the author has not conducted any research on the number of households in Whitchurch now, nor the projected number. I visited the Red House last week and was saddened by the state of it, surprised that the owner had let it fall into such a state when their intention is to profit from it. NPPF paragraph 196 states that where there is evidence of deliberate neglect or damage to a heritage asset, the deteriorated state of the asset should not be taken into account. Policy CN7 is to support proposals which provide and improve essential services whilst also protecting essential services from redevelopment or change of use. If the committee approve these plans tonight, then we will have lost the opportunity forever. In concentrating on CN7, the evidence the officer has ignored the evident breaches of CN8. One man's failure to run a business should not ruin a 400-year-old pub. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Williams, you have 4 minutes.
First, I apologise if I repeat and reinforce points that have been made, but I think it is important to drive things home because when you're listening to people speaking, you don't always take on the same points. Whitchurch has a designated town centre in our local plan, and that should afford the community some protection for important amenities such as our pubs. We say that this application is an end desired by the applicant who has manipulated the planning process. Any sense of justice should offer protection to a much wanted asset in our community. The integrity of the amenities in our town centre are vital for the successful vibrancy of the town. If the owners of the Red House chose to sell the pub, they pass on the responsibility for its success to someone else. But they instead have been clever in the way the planning system is being used to facilitate the threat we face with this application. It is a great shame that doubts about the integrity of the longer-term intentions were not formally raised and greater commercial scrutiny taken when plans were submitted to develop the car park area for 3 dwellings. The planning access and design statement for that application said the aims of the overall scheme are securing the future viability of the public house as a community asset, a heritage asset, and as a business. The planning, design and access statement also fails to mention the imposition of the 50% overage clause of which we've spoken about. Therefore, the marketing exercise has been fundamentally undermined by the approach taken by the applicants, and therefore we say it doesn't meet policy. The lack of attention, maintenance in the run-up to the closure and since the closure is tantamount to deliberate neglect. In line with para 196 MPPF principles, the deteriorated state of this heritage asset should not be taken into account. Government policy has been designed to help save pubs like the Red House. The Red House is needed and supported as a pub, and such a grand swell of local support from the community in letters of objection speaks to the fact that people want the Red House retained. Indeed, it was recognised by the borough and as an asset of community value, with support of Whitchurch Town Council, confirming its importance to the town. EM10 offers the community protection. The building is of historic and commercial significance to Whitchurch, and this is reflected in the asset of community value registration. The Red House is a Grade 2 listed 17th century timber framed building prominent on London Street and in the conservation area. It is vital to the town's social and economic community. Policy CN7 should be used to resist the loss of such a key community asset. The planning officer agrees in their report that critical elements of Policy CN7 are not met, but then confusingly, based on a purely desk report by Bruton Knowles, the planning officer argues that the Red House, closed for 4 years, is unviable when the community level of support suggests how important this asset is.
You have just over half a minute left.
Bruton Knowles are unable to pinpoint the cause of the downturn in revenues, yet the community know it was due to the consistently poor management. Policy EM11 states that all development must conserve or enhance the quality of the borough's heritage assets in a manner appropriate to their significance. This application clearly doesn't do that, and the Historic Environment Officer agrees. Officers say that the public benefits of the scheme outweigh the harm done. We say that the harm done by this application directly impacts the public benefits of retaining the pub. Members, please support our community, help us to retain the future of the Red House as a pub, reject this application.
Thank you very much. Right, questions to the speakers, and if you could address your questions to one of the councillors, I think it will save us getting 3 different answers, and hopefully save us a bit of time. Councillor Gaskell.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Councillor Ashfield. You've mentioned this clause which stopped the purchase last time. Could you give more details on that, on why it stopped the purchase?
Perhaps would be a better question. It perhaps would have been a better question for the applicant. I understand it's a clause, a covenant that suggests that if somebody was to buy the pub and run it as a pub for a certain amount of time, and then it got permission to turn into houses, that the applicant would then receive the sort of difference in the market value. Obviously, that makes it almost impossible to get a mortgage on that kind of basis, making it, I think, an unviable offer.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. This one's for Councillor Ashfield. You were saying how busy Whitchurch was the other night. The BK report that we've got in front of us makes this model, which is based, saying that whoever takes it on has got to look at £600,000 a year turnover of what appears to be a 5-day week. My crude maths, at £5 a drink, say 500 drinks a night. So if everybody has a couple of drinks, would you say the pubs you went to had 250 people in them all night long? I mean, is there that demand? That's the...
I mean, one thing I'll say about the Bruton Knowles report is it was written by somebody that never went to Whitchurch and didn't look at the building, and certainly wasn't out where I was on Friday night, doesn't spend their money in Whitchurch. But this isn't just about wet sales. The Red House has always been very well known for the food it sells as well, and that's always been a really prominent part in the past of its business.
Councillor McCormick.
My question's already been asked by Councillor Gaskell.
Thank you. Any more questions? No? Thank you very much, councillors. Questions to officers? Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question to officers. On page 209, it says that the inclusion of the Red House on the list of community valued assets does not itself preclude the development of the site. It is nevertheless a material consideration that is to be taken into account, okay, together with all other planning matters. I'm just wondering, how much weight should we as councillors give, okay, to the fact that the Red House is a listed community value asset?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, it's certainly of weight in the decision-making process, but it needs to be weighed up against the other local plan policies, notably CN7. I think there's been extensive work done by the officer on the report to try and summarise the findings of that, and the retention of the community asset is one of those considerations that need to be put into that balance. So yes, I think weight can be attributed to that feature, but as the officer has suggested, it's not sufficient to outweigh the other considerations that have been laid before you.
Councillor Frost.
Thank you. Thank you for that reply. It almost answered the question. I'm just a bit confused. How much weight should we give to the fact that this is a community, listed community value asset? Is it significant? Is it a little? Okay. I'm just trying to understand how much we should give, in your professional opinion.
I'll just add to the answer that Phil gave then. In terms of policy CN7 in particular, it's broken up into 3 parts, the A, B and C criteria. They are all divided into ORs, so you only need to meet one of them. I think probably the most applicable part to an asset of community value is part A, which is the service or facility is no longer needed. And the conclusion of officers is that that part isn't met. So it remains an asset of community value, and it remains to be needed. So part A is not met, but the policy is worded that only one of those 3 parts, A, B or C, needs to be met. Each one has or after it. The third part is the proposal, so C is the proposals will provide sufficient community benefit to outweigh the loss of the existing facility or service, meeting evidence of a local need. And again, it's not put forward on that basis by the applicant, and officers don't conclude that the proposal complies with that part. So really, the asset of community value really comes down to A, I think, in terms of the service or facility no longer being needed, but the officer's conclusion is that A and C are not met, but that B is. So it may be an asset of community value, it may still be needed by the community, it is still needed by the community, by the representations, but the officer's conclusion in terms of B, which in itself is then broken down into parts, it's no longer practical, which the officer report goes into in detail, concluding that there's not evidence of it not being practical, but it's the desirable or viable part that officers conclude that the proposal does meet in terms of policy. So, by virtue of the 2-year marketing exercise and by virtue of the amount of turnover that would be required for the property and in addition to that the amount of investment that would be required in the pub, the proposal isn't concluded to be desirable or viable. So coming all the way back to your question, is the asset of community value of material weight in the assessment? Yes, it is, but it is in terms of part A, I would suggest, rather than part B, which is the part that officers conclude that the proposal meets in policy terms, and it only needs to meet one of those 3 parts.
Thank you, Greg. I don't see any other hands up. So, Greg, on the bottom of that policy, it reads, the Council will work positively with communities, including local voluntary organisations, and support proposal to develop, retain, improve or reuse community leisure or cultural facilities, including those set out in neighbourhood plans, orders, including community right to build orders, along with appropriate supporting development which would make such provision economically viable. Can you tell us what's been done in that regard?
That's okay. Thank you for that, Chair. My reading of that paragraph is that that relates to proposals that are put forward by the local community for proposals for the reuse of essential facilities and services. So if it was a proposal that if the community had purchased the public house and were then coming forward with a proposal to develop it, or if there was a proposal for a new shop or something coming along, that would be considered and would be processed in the consideration of application, working with then the community on their proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Greg. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I'm still going back to this weight, okay, under CN7, okay. And I'd like to ask a question on the viability aspect, okay, and the fact that the owner puts in a clause like the overreach clause, which, if it's as horrific and onerous as we've heard today, okay, how can that negate the viability, okay, of the community value asset? And if it does not, okay, negate the community asset value, okay, how much more weighting should we give to this issue?
Thank you, Councillor. Is that a question around whether the overage clause has got weight in the planning consideration?
That is correct, yeah.
No, an overage clause would be a private matter between any person who is an owner and anybody who was looking to purchase that.
Sorry, Chair, just one supplementary, and then I'll let it go. But surely, if the owner of the property, okay, is demanding such an onerous clause as to make, you know, the selling of the community, the listed community asset, okay, unviable, surely, you know, that should not be, you know, given any weight under CN7, or am I reading it wrongly?
Just taking advice from legal colleagues, the overage clause comes under property law as opposed to planning law is the legal advice there. But there is some discussion in the report around an overage clause on page 214. But in essence, the offer that was made was 350,000. I'm just trying to find the relevant page where that's discussed for you. That's at the bottom of page 209. So the offer that was put forward was for 350,000. So, and that offer then wasn't. The report follows through. That offer wasn't then backed with the financial backing at the time. Although we've heard that that would have been the intention to raise those funds. So yeah, the overage clause is a matter of property law rather than planning law. The offer that was made was 350,000, which at the time was considerably below what the property was valued at. And in addition to that, wasn't at the time supported by financial backing. So that was the reason set out in the report at page 209 that it was turned down.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, I know I said I'd let it go, but I just have one more, okay, and that's, but surely the fact that, you know, the overreach clause is property law really doesn't matter. The fact is that overreach clause has a direct impact on the viability, okay. Surely, you know, that has some weighting which we should consider or take into mind.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go into it in more detail, other than, as I said, it's rather than a planning matter, it's a property matter. We did hear that it would have only applied if the onward sale was to do with residential, so it would only been 90% of uplift, but then I'm straying into talking about the property side. The fact is the offer was for 350,000. That was below the amount that it was valued at, or what was marketed at the time, and it wasn't backed by financial backing, so it didn't get to the point where you would have had an overage clause needing to be discussed, because the offer was not acceptable at that time.
Thank you, Chair. I could go on, but I won't. I'll leave it there.
I think you are going to have to leave it there. Thank you. Are there any other questions to officers? Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. There's another question of weight we can offer. Like the Whitchurch Neighbourhood Development policy or plan, they've got policy, is it GD8, specifically highlighting the importance of increasing prosperity by encouraging rural tourism. And then policy GD5, retaining economic vibrancy and vitality for the town centre. So they're quite key in terms of this as a facility, whether it's community or not. So what sort of weight can we put there? That because I don't see any sort of discussion of that in the officer report specifically, unless I've missed it. But it's how much weight we can put with the neighbour development policy plan.
Bear with us, Councillor. We'll come back to you in a moment.
Is there any other questions whilst they look that one up? No? Do you have a question? No. In that case, we'll have to wait on you.
I think whilst Phil's just looking up the policy GD5 and GD8, if I just draw your attention to, it might be worth having a quick look at page 211, and in particular the penultimate paragraph, which talks about policy GD6, which seeks to protect the redevelopment of land and buildings for uses that support town centres. That policy, in terms of trying to talk about retaining the town centre viability, talks about properties that are within the town centre as identified within the area map, which is part of the Basingstoke and Dean local plan policies map, and confirms that this the application is actually located outside of that area, and the policy GD6 isn't relevant in that respect. I think policy GD5 and GD8 that were mentioned also talk about town in particular. So yeah, GD5 is talking about properties that encourage tourism and redevelopments that bring, GD8, the redevelopments that bring visitors to the town. Obviously the proposal is not a proposal for tourism, it's the opposite to that. It's a proposal for residential, so I presume that you're making a point that you could take an inverse view of that it would be taking tourism away from the town. That is a conclusion that could be reached, but we come back, I think, to policy CN7 and Part B in terms of that desirability and viability to retain it as an ongoing demand, and the pub being closed for a number of years. And then GD5 is to encourage new commercial development, retain economic vibrancy and vitality, and enhance the frontages in the town centre. So it comes back again to it's not within the defined town centre, so that policy wouldn't be directly applicable. But in terms of retaining commercial uses, it again comes back to, yes, it's a commercial use, but it's also a community use, and the same assessment would be undertaken under Part CN7, A, B and C, which has been set out and discussed at length.
Any more questions for the officers? Councillor Gaskell.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to question this term "no longer viable." Obviously, the owner has tried to run it as a business and not succeeded. But there is a group of people who are willing to purchase it, and I assume that they went to a bank to put down the offer of 350,000. They would have had to put a business plan together to do that, and the bank would have had to accept it as a commercial viable operation. So are we allowed to put that in our documentation that it's no longer viable?
Yes, that's the assessment, the independent assessment that was undertaken by Bruton Knowles, who the council commissioned. So, based on their professional opinion, reviewing the evidence and the amount of turnover that would be required, then yes, that's the assessment.
Yeah, just a subsequent one. If the bank's going to give a loan, they would have done their own business plan, I guess, or assessment.
Yeah, but in terms of the offer, I think the community offer is the one I think you're talking about. There wasn't a financial backing to that.
Okay, I don't see any more hands up for questions, so we'll move on to debate. Councillor Goderson.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to point out that over a considerable length of time I was involved with two rather substantial pubs/restaurants. So having visited this particular site on 2 occasions now and had a good look round the inside of the buildings, I have no hesitation in saying that this is a very interesting prospect in the sense that it's a rather rare beast, which is an unattached free house. It's a free house not tied to a particular brewery, which actually theoretically should make it a very interesting opportunity for somebody. I'm quite happy to state that, in my opinion, if taken over by a young, energetic couple with fairly reasonable kitchen skills, there's no reason why it shouldn't be extremely successful and an asset to its local community. I mean, when you talk about viability of a particular business, whether it's viable or not depends whether it's being run by competent professionals or not. And all I'm saying is, in my view, this would be a very viable situation if run by proper professionals who've got plenty of work ethic and know what they're doing. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Listened very carefully to the arguments that have been presented this evening, read the report, and note that the report itself is fairly balanced on a number of points. CN7 is clear. Taking all of the matters into account, the council is of the view that the applicant has not demonstrated that the service or facility is no longer needed, and the application is therefore unable to meet the requirements of criteria A of CN7, and I think that's incredibly important. The point about viability is it is in the eye of the beholder of the person writing the report. It always is. That is the nature of viability. It is a debate to be had about the facts that are in front of you. And if you sit and do a desktop study, rather than take the time and effort to undertake a thorough, comprehensive, well-researched piece of review, then you are going to come up with not necessarily easy conclusions. And I don't think the viability is easily concluded in the report or in the evidence that we've had presented this evening. I just don't believe it. I think the argument that's made between having 2 dwellings versus the pub and the pub's importance to the community has been very eloquently put. I think the importance of that commercial entity in Whitchurch town centre, as far as I would look at it being. I appreciate we've got a boundary that specifies where the town centre is, but I personally see it as being in the town centre. I think it's very clear how important that is to the viability of the town centre, is a part of the argument as well. So all of our policies around protecting our district centres, protecting the viability of the town centre is really important. I think the community asset bit matters, and I would give a lot of weight to it, to be perfectly honest, and we are entitled to under the NPPF, we are entitled to, because it actually, unlike other things that we would have loved to have been designated as community assets that weren't at the time their planning application came to us, this actually has it at the time the application is in front of us, so we should give it weight. I just think, it's the owner's choice if they've made it unviable by adding clauses that relate to property law, that relate to other matters beyond planning. That's their choice, and that's a matter for another place. The fact they've made it unviable then has consequences for them in the sense of what they choose to argue and the way they bring it forward. They've still got to satisfy all of our planning policy tests, and I don't think they do. So for me personally, the harm of the loss of the pub outweighs the benefit that would be gained from simply gaining 2 dwellings. And I would move rejection of the application based on CN7, based upon the harm outweighing the benefit of 2 dwellings versus the pub as a community asset of value.
Thank you. Councillor Frost.
I will happily second that.
Thank you. Anybody else want to speak? Councillor Freeman.
Just for my 2 pence, I can say from a personal level that the Red House used to certainly bring in a lot of tourism from outside. I can remember they used to run a folk and blues festival during the August bank holiday. I know I went to it, I sang there for many years. It brings people into the town on a bank holiday weekend, and there were certainly other there was a regular folk night there. I think it brings in people to so the tourism clause certainly stands. It's a valuable community asset, as demonstrated by the strength of local feeling to actually keep the pub as a pub, and I think it deserves a chance. It's not been managed adequately to bring it to what it should be, to fulfil its potential, and I think maybe with a community group at the helm it could do that. I certainly will support the motion to refuse this application.
Okay, anybody else want to speak? Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. Well, much of what I would have said has been said already, but certainly those of us who went on the viewing saw a building that had been allowed to deteriorate into a dreadful state. It needs massive investment, hundreds of thousands of pounds. But having said that, I don't think the community are fazed by any requirements other than the 50% overage clause, which seems to be a particularly nasty burden to be burdened with. But I think that there has been demonstration of willingness to take it on. Hundreds of letters of objection. The fact that 20 years ago there were 7 or 8 pubs in Winchester, in Whitchurch, and now there's just 2. I think there is a case there for, and it's an unattached free house as well, so you don't have the brewer breathing down your neck. So I think it's got good prospects, and I think that it is a balance, isn't it, in terms of would the benefits of building 2 houses outweigh the loss of a community asset, a pub with heritage that was popular, but obviously if it's allowed to get into a deteriorated state, that impacts on its ability to attract people in. So, I'm glad that refusal has been moved, because if it hadn't, I'd have moved it myself.
Councillor Gaskell, and then we will go to the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just want to reiterate what everybody else has said tonight. We're actually looking at whether we should be changing the use from a public house, and we've got potential buyers. We've got somebody who wants to sell it. This is just a negotiation in my mind, and anything but sort of refusal of this application will stop that negotiation process. So I'm in mind to reject this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey, could you give us your exact reasons for refusal?
I think the harm of the loss of the pub as a community asset of value outweighs the benefit of developing 2 dwellings we are asked to make a change of use, and I don't think the change of use is justified.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded for refusal. Those in favour of refusal? Full set. Thank you. That is refused. And Philip, or is it yours?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. In terms of the refusal, the application is refused. The reason being for the harm, for the loss of the pub as an asset of community value not being outweighed by the benefits of the proposal. If I could just highlight members' attention to the relevant policies, policy CN7 of the Basingstoke and Dean local plan and the Whitchurch neighbourhood plan policy GD6 as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Greg. We are quite clearly going to go over the 3 hours. So is everybody happy to continue? I take silence as a yes. No. Anybody not happy to continue? Okay. I'll put up with content. In that case, we will continue and finish the agenda, but I suggest a 5-minute break. Thank you. Restart in 1 minute, please. Okay, everybody, is everybody back? Nobody got an empty seat where you didn't have before? Right, item number 6, Red House, the listed building approval. Phil.
Thank you, Chair. The application on tonight's agenda is recommended for approval. The proposed description of the application is to enable the conversion of existing public house, restaurant and residential accommodation to 2 numbered dwellings. Given the previous refusal on the scheme, the change of use doesn't have permission, and by granting permission of this listed building consent for internal conversion, it could end up in a situation whereby internal works could change to dwellings, whereas the use would remain as a pub, and therefore it wouldn't be viable to use it as a pub because it's laid out as dwellings. So on that basis, it's the recommendation of officers to alter the recommendation for refusal on that basis. And well, I'll read out a reason for refusal that we have written on that. The reconfiguration of the listed building as 2 dwellings is not established through any planning permission. The reconfiguration of the listed building in this instance would therefore not be viable within an approved use. This would as such alter the character of the property, not reflecting its character as a public house, and as such the proposal is contrary to policy EM11 of the local plan and the sections within the national planning policy framework. On that basis, the application is recommended for refusal as discussed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Phil. Right, our first speakers are Gary Martin and Rebecca Jubb. If you'd like, no, you're declining to speak. Thank you, makes the evening a lot quicker. I think our councillors have... Yeah, please, you have the right, please come and speak. You have 4 minutes between you. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thanks. I just wanted to take this opportunity to just clarify one thing that appears to have been misdirected on the previous discussion, just in case it's of any relevance to this decision. The fact that the ACV is a very specific designation listing, which has regulations which go with it, and we have fulfilled all of the requirements of that. The ACV requirement is not a prevention of a change of use, as you've discussed. It is a material consideration for a planning application or application for any development. But in this case, it runs for a period of 5 years. There's a point at which you have to trigger to say that you're intending to sell the property, which we did. There's then a period of 6 weeks for somebody to express an interest in wanting to purchase the site, which we fulfilled. The community did come forward at that point and said they were interested. There's then a 6-month moratorium period, which we had to allow them to consider and look to raise the funds and make a reasonable offer. There's no obligation on the owner to sell it unless the offer is acceptable. And as we've already explored, the offer wasn't acceptable. The overage clause that has been discussed has no bearing at all on the ability to raise finance for the purchase. The funding wasn't there. There was never any money in place to back up that offer, and the ACV requirements of the regulations were fully met. So the property doesn't actually have an ACV on it anymore because all of the requirements that are there have been met, and it falls away because it's of no consequence. Any teeth that the ACV listing has been fulfilled. And so that in itself has no bearing on the decision-making process for the application. The recommendation is that the Bruton Knowles report, commissioned by the Planning Department, accepted by the Planning Department, that concluded that it met the policy requirements, was accepted and resulted in the recommendation for approval. We have satisfied the criteria of the policy, and that is all we're required to do. We've done everything possible, as we've already explained to you, and I'm concerned that you've misdirected yourself in making that decision based on information that's not correct and an ACV listing which is of no consequence to the decision-making process. Your policy only requires us to demonstrate it's not viable and it's not practical or desirable. We've done that. Your officers have recommended approval. The Bruton Knowles report has done everything it needed to do. We had no influence on that. We provided all the information they required, and the Bruton Knowles report, which your committee regularly use and rely on, that is what you commissioned. You gave them the brief, and they've answered the questions that were asked, and they've provided all the information that's required. So they've recommended that you approve the application, and you haven't, but you've based it on information that's not correct. So I just want to take the opportunity to clarify that in case it is of any consequence here.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. Questions?
I've got a question now, Mr. Chair, to the officers.
We'll go to questions to officers in a minute.
No, information is now coming out, which is above.
Thank you, Councillor Hussey. I understand what you're saying, that you now don't have a full report recommending a refusal, in which case, I'll deal with that in a minute. Are there any questions to the speakers? Yes? No. Thank you very much. In light of what Councillor Hussey's just said, I move that we defer this item for a full report from the officers as to whether we should accept it or refuse it. Is there a seconder? Yeah. Seconded by Councillor Court. Those in favour of deferral? Yeah. And anyone against deferral? No. Right. The item is deferred. Thank you. Phil, if you can confirm that.
Thank you, Chairman. So the application is deferred for a full report to be written with a reason for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 7, Pirates Cottage, Tubbs Lane, Highclere.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. This is an application at Pirates Cottage, Tubbs Lane, Highclere. The proposal is for the variation of condition 1 of permission 20/01664/TDC to amend the plan numbers to allow the addition of an oak frame glazed porch, increase the single-storey side extension to a two-storey side extension, and increase its depth by 1.3 metres. A general update to the design and fenestration, which includes the addition of 2 roof lights to the first floor rear elevation, reduce the height of the the dwelling by 0.1 metres. The bedrooms have also increased from 3 to 4. There's no update since the preparation of the agenda. The application is recommended for approval, subject to conditions listed at the end of the report on pages 269 to 273 of the agenda.
Thank you, Bethan. And our first speaker is Mr. York from Highclere Parish Council. And good evening, Mr. York. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining, and the microphone button is in front of you.
Right, good evening, everybody. Yes, this planning application, we believe, represents the sort of smoke and mirrors of the planning process. The history of it is interesting. The original PIP, which some of you, I'm sure, will have visited the site, faced tremendous local opposition. In a small village, there was significant opposition. And when the next phase came through of the design of the house, again, tremendous opposition to that. Interestingly, in the original planning statements and paragraph 444, the proposal could make a worthwhile contribution to the stock of smaller dwellings in the village. Now small has become big. It's gone from a 3 to a 4-bedroomed house. I also serve on the Highclere Neighbourhood Planning Group, and we recently commissioned a survey, housing needs survey. The housing needs survey done by external consultants concluded that what Highclere really needs is smaller, affordable, downsizable properties, not more 4 and 5 bedroomed houses, of which we've got loads. The size and the shape of the plot. The shape is bizarre, as you can see from the diagrams that were flashed up earlier. It's like a strange triangle. And the area of the plot is calculated at 0.11 hectares. Now this, I believe, and we believe as Parish Council, included the driveway, which is actually a track. And the driveway is not included, we believe, in the property for sale. So the calculations are therefore, in our view, flawed. In the village design statement that Highclere published some years ago now, it stated quite clearly that big buildings in small plots are particularly intrusive and should be avoided. The orientation of the house, no windows face the original owner's property, surprise, surprise. All of the impact of the house faces the Four Oaks Close, which is at the back of the house. And if we look at EN10 as a policy, how on earth does this respect the local environment and amenities of local properties? It has a significant impact on the local landscape. How does it preserve the landscape and scenic beauty of the ANOB beyond us? There is a massive loss of privacy to those houses behind the property and overshadowing. The new house is larger at the upper level, so the impact is greater. There are 4 Velux windows and not 2, as in the original house. It's far too close to those houses. It's 13.5 metres from 3 and 4 Four Oaks and 20 metres from 5 Four Oaks. I was standing in the garden yesterday and it will be particularly intrusive. All of those
30
houses,
seconds remaining.
Sorry?
You have 30 seconds remaining.
All of those are closer than Pirates Cottage. Access is tight, it's a track, and it's highly angled. There are 3 parking spaces planned. I don't know how you would get a vehicle up there if there are 3 vehicles parked, turned, and try to get out. Impossible. And any emergency vehicles, bigger vehicles, large Amazon vans would have to reverse out, without a doubt. The building needs to be smaller if we have to have one. We need to reorientate it. And yes, generally make it a smaller scheme. And incidentally, there are about 5,000 litres of kerosene in the tank stored right up against the boundary of the property that is being planned. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the speaker? I've got one. Looking at the plan on page 277, can we get that up, if that's possible? There's a hedge shown directly to the south, and as you say, very close to the proposed building. How established is that hedge? Is it 3 feet high, 10 feet high?
The one behind the house directly.
Yeah.
It's about, I was standing next to it, it must be probably in excess of the height of that grill above you. It's a laurel hedge and it's been let loose. The back of that dwelling will be extremely dark, a very small rear to it, and I personally wouldn't want to live in it.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions for the speaker? No? Thank you very much. Could you just turn your microphone off as you move? We have Mr. Runcie and Mr. Selwood. You have 4 minutes between you. I'll warn you when you have a minute left.
Thank you very much. I'm the agent. James is the new applicant, having purchased the site to build the house for his family. Although there are a number of objections that have been received, these relate primarily to the principle of development. The application put before you today is to simply increase above the single-storey element that's already got planning permission and add a modest porch. The increase in number of bedrooms is a client requirement, effectively, for his family. As the officer's report states, there's no significant change to the approved design, and there's no adverse overlooking or overshadowing. The parking provision meets the Basingstoke Dean standards. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the speakers? No, I have none. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Questions to officers? Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Could we look at the proposed element? In fact, the ones that are up there. Right. I'll change my glasses. Oh, look, there they are. Right. I can't on here see, but there is a very vague dotted line. Was the existent planning permission? Oh gosh. Right. Hold on. Yeah, I know. So it was a single-storey pitched roof extension, and it's now being lifted up. Footprint the same. Just
It's a slight increase of 1.3 metres in depth.
Right.
The two-storey extension, the two-storey bit is very minimal.
Right, okay. Right. Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions for officers? No? Okay, in that case, debate. If there's no debate, I will move the officer recommendation from the chair. Councillor Court. Thank you. Moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? And I make that everyone but one. And those against? One abstention. Thank you. That's approved. Bethan.
So the application is recommended for approval as per the agenda. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay. Okay. Item number 8, land at Western Corbett, Basingstoke. And Philip.
Thank you, Chair. Item number 8, which can be found on page 280 of tonight's agenda, is a full application for the demolition of existing agricultural building and erection of a single-storey dwelling and detached garage with ancillary use. It's the amended scheme to that approved under application 20.00824 FUL. If I could draw members' attention to the update paper, it summarises the site visit that was undertaken, and also following the site visit there was a request for an additional plan to show the existing and proposed boundary lines and the location of the dwelling in relation to those. And on page 8 of the update paper, that plan has been provided for members. The application is recommended for approval, subject to the signing of a legal agreement to secure the previous permission not be implemented if any permission granted pursuant to the current application is implemented, and subject to the condition listed at the end of the officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. And if we could have our first speakers, which is Sheila Stranks and Peter Stemp. Good evening to you both. You have 4 minutes between you, and I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining. Could you put the microphone on, please? It will. That's it.
Yep. I'll do the 4 minutes, and Sheila and I will take questions as appropriate. It's useful to compare and contrast 0824 and 3502. They're both located in the Western Patrick Conservation Area. Application 824 is the extant granted permission. It's one single building, 231 square metres footprint, fully positioned on Barn A footprint. The application is supported by a full bespoke LVIA, including mitigation proposals. No comments or objections from the community whatsoever. Application 3502, amendment to the approved scheme, 824, is strikingly different. There was a tsunami of comments, over 20 community comments, Upton Gray Parish Council, our ward councillor, a very high number from a very small community, and all saying in practice that the significantly increased size, mass and more prominent location of 3502 have a harmful impact on the landscape. It breaches landscape policy EM1, and it should be refused. The 3502 amendments are really significant differences and changes to 0824, making it effectively a new application. The key points of the amendments, the site plan for 3502 is increased from 824, being extended 15 metres outside the red line of 0824 to the north, not 6 metres in the applicant report, in the application officer report. There are now 2 buildings in a more prominent and visible open location. Their combined footprint is 360 square metres, which is 55% bigger than 231. The greater size and mass seems to us to be a greater impact of development. The new dwelling is repositioned to a more prominent and visible location, 25 metres north of Barn A and not 14 metres in the application officer's report. No part remains within the footprint of Barn A. The new cruciform shape means that over half of the new dwelling now lies outside of the granted permission for the 0824 site. North elevation of the dwelling encroaches 5 metres onto recently farmed agricultural land, which has no permission for residential building. A detached 2-storey garage, 85 square metres, is prominent and adjacent to right-of-way 3 with harmful visual effects. And the greater size and mass of the 2 buildings and their more visible location will be seen from the landscapes, viewpoints and footpaths.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Finally, no updated and resubmitted LVIA for 3502 has been received. And for this application, in the conservation area and landscape of significance, comprising so many fundamental amendments and generating so many landscape-based objections, it seems inconceivable to us that an updated LVIA has not been required and submitted for application 3502. Even Basingstoke and Dean's landscape architect and team have objected and commented in their landscape response in March this year that, and I quote, an updated LVIA should be submitted so that the landscape effects of the amended proposals can be properly assessed. This absence of an updated and submitted LVIA has to be a material consideration in the determination of this planning application 3502. In summary and conclusion, we contend that the 3502 application breaches the landscape policy EM1 and should be refused. Thank you for listening to us.
Thank you very much. Questions for the speakers? No? Thank you very much. If we could have Caroline Downey and Mark McVeigh. Good evening to you both. You have 4 minutes between you, and I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Good evening, Chairman and Councillors. Firstly, thank you for staying late this evening to hear us. My name is Mark, and along with my partner Francesca, we are the owners of White Stag Barn, formerly known as the Barns at Weston Corbett. We purchased this land in the Barns in June of last year, along with the existing planning permission to build a new barn-style house. There are inevitably some changes that we wanted to make to the existing plans to make it our own. These were mainly moving the location of the house approximately 20 metres to the north and building a garage block. Moving the house further to the north will result in saving 9 trees and bring the house out from the shade of our neighbours' nearby beech tree copse. When we submitted these plans, we genuinely thought that these would be uncontroversial. We have now been told by neighbours that the coordinated negative reaction from some local residents was a result of the misinterpretation of our plans, combined with the outrage caused from the new large development that was approved on the edge of Upton Gray and Weston Mark a few years ago. We were also told that as a result of this large development, there was a wish in the area to prevent any and all developments from any outsiders in the area. We have now had the opportunity to meet a lot of the local residents and get on very well with them. The recent Jubilee party at Councillor Cubitt's parents' house in the village was a great event to meet everyone, and a number of our neighbours actually apologised to us that night for their reaction to our plans. Councillors, we simply want to move the existing plans for our house slightly to the north and build a garage. This will have no negative impact on anyone, nor will it impinge on any views, and it will have the additional benefit of saving 9 trees. We love the area and moved here as we have a number of both personal friends and close family friends who live locally. We're looking forward to building our dream home and hope that you all agree with the Planning Department's recommendation to approve these plans so that we can start building our new home. Thank you.
Chairman, members, thank you for your time this evening. Before you is an application that the officers are seeking to approve with your support. The application seeks to move the existing permission further north into the plot and extend the approved dwelling with the addition of a garage with a room used to be used over as a home office or a gym. There are no objections from council consultees. To clarify, no objections from Waste, Highways, Natural England, the natural environment, historic environment, archaeology, biodiversity or trees. The landscape objection was overruled by the officer writing the report and her management. There have been local objections to the application, but we are of the opinion that these are due to the misunderstanding, as Mark mentioned earlier. Following the site visit on Friday last week, we've submitted as part of the update paper that you have before you a revised site and location plan that includes further information to clarify the scheme.
You have 1 minute remaining.
In terms of policy, we consider the scheme does not have a significant impact and is in line with current policy guidance, especially on the basis that due to the current 5-year housing land supply, policies SS1 and SS6 are out of date. Specifically, the proposed dwelling does not run along the northern boundary, which is part of the applicant's ownership, but well within it, and we believe this is where potentially the issue has arisen with the local community. There are not 3 new buildings being erected. The 2 dilapidated barns on the site will be demolished as per conditions within the report, and the increase in footprint is larger, but there's nothing to state in the policy that we cannot do that.
Finally, we agreed to enter into the legal agreement as requested by officers, and we therefore ask committee members to follow the officers' recommendation for approval. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you. Questions to the speakers? Councillor Godison.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Beckbeck. Can I just ask you to confirm that it says in the proposal, the applicant is proposing to retain the existing agricultural building for the duration of the development build, with all agricultural buildings eventually being demolished on site to allow for the proposed development. So can you confirm that the two barns which we noticed when we came on the viewing panel, by the time the proposal, if passed, is developed, will have been taken down?
So the barn at the back of the site will be removed in order to build the dwelling. The front barn near the gateway as you drove in, that building will be retained purely during the process of the build to store materials and furniture, etc., from Mr. McVeigh's house. So it's literally there and it's been set as a condition that it will be removed once the actual barn has been built and developed.
There have been a number of thefts in the area of other sites being developed, and obviously storing materials in an enclosed barn will keep it safe.
No, thank you. I'm only concerned that when the development, if passed, is finished, that at that point it will have been taken down. But I fully understand you need to use it for storage during construction. Thank you.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. Attended the site viewing and we had a good look round, but you made a comment that the change of plan that we have in front of us will save 9 trees. I don't know whether the officers can help by putting up a map, but can you tell us which trees you're going to save? Because I can't remember seeing any trees.
Yeah, so the barn that's coming down where the house is actually going, on the southern side of that barn, there are 9 trees that are littered around the bottom, mostly sycamore trees. A couple of, I'm not very good at my trees, although I'm a member of Woodland Trust.
It's between the two barns, though, isn't
It's basically between the two barns, but where the existing plans are, if we were to build there, all those trees would have to come down because they actually would be in the way of the footings in the building. 9 trees that are scattered around.
Councillor Rattigan.
Yes, thank you. I was on the site viewing. I'm just making sure that garage block, which looks quite substantial, it looks like it's just for 2 cars. Would you be content if we get rid of permitted development rights so as that can't be converted to a house? Yes?
That's fine. Yes, absolutely.
I'm grateful. Thank you.
Councillor Gaskell.
Thank you, Chair. On page 291 in the public observations, there's reference to the location of a footpath going through the grounds. Could you tell us where that is?
Yes, so if you look where the...
So if you look at the other, if you could bring up the other slide, it's probably just a little bit, just about to be able to explain it. Do you see where the red and blue line is to the north? So if you see that line, you come just further east of it, just to the south, just to the southeast, you'll see a little dotted line just above that tree that would then go down this way towards the gateway. So there's a slightly very dotted line. It's on your update paper. A very slight dotted line that follows.
But
there, yeah, exactly. So the footpath doesn't cross the site. No.
So coming up the footpath, you wouldn't be able to see the house?
And you don't have to move it?
No, not at all.
Any more questions for the speakers? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Cubitt. Good evening, Councillor Cubitt. You have 4 minutes I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you very much. Good evening, members. Firstly, I'm very sorry I was unable to make the site viewing as I had a long-standing diary commitment. And secondly, unfortunately, the parish council are most upset that they weren't in attendance either, but they thought they were not permitted to attend the site viewing. So that's the reason why, unfortunately, there was no representation from either the residents or elected representatives. Their upset is due to the fact they were unable to provide what they would consider to be a balanced commentary on the site. The parish and the residents supported the original application granted in 2020, and they continue to support that application. So commentary about other applications that are completely not relevant to this planning application is not relevant. The salient piece of information is that the residents were happy with the original application. Unfortunately, this application is markedly different to the previously approved application, and a new landscape visual impact assessment has not been undertaken. And we consider that this is and should be essential to your decision making tonight. And since the parish is content with the existing approved application, I request, in view of all the comments made in the paper, specifically in relation to the landscape experts and the heritage experts, that you refuse this application as the direct default is to the original application, which the residents have no problem with, as its harm is considerably greater than the existing application on the views of many, many residents and why such a large percentage of the residents refused or made representations against it. Or, failing that, you defer making a decision tonight until the applicant has commissioned a new landscape visual impact assessment, which would thereby enable you to make a correct evaluation on the impact of these significant amendments to the existing application. As I said, the landscape officer and the heritage officer both state that this application will result in greater harm than the original approval. And the relevance of the public benefit outweighing the harm can't be applied as the public benefit exists from the existing approval. There is no greater or increased public benefit from these amendments. This application does not produce or provide any additional benefits, but it does produce greater harm. The impacts on the views, the breach of EM1, EM4 and EM10, and the impacts on the MPPF paragraphs with chapters 15 and 16 apply and are referred to in the document, namely in relation to 203, paragraph 203 in the MPPF.
You have 1 minute remaining.
So one of the themes that weaves through the officer's comment is that the public benefit outweighs the harm. And as I said, these amendments don't concur with that. And on page 296, it says, notwithstanding the above, a material consideration in this instance is the legitimate fallback position of the approved application, which, although not yet implemented, could still be. And then it then goes on to say, should the proposed development have a similar or less of an impact than that approved, then it would be appropriate for such development to be considered. And as I have outlined to you in my 4 minutes, that is not the case. The harm is not similar, it is considerably greater. The views and the impacts and the fact that it is not on the initial original footprint, and it has incurred a great deal of residents who do not support this application despite supporting completely the previous application. I request that you either defer until the applicant commissions a new landscape visual impact assessment that is relevant to his application and not to a completely unrelated build, or you reject it so that he then reverts to the original application which the community supports. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions for Councillor Cubitt? No, I have none. Thank you very much. Questions to officers? No, I have no questions to officers. Debate. Councillor Freeman.
I feel that there are quite a few benefits to moving the house. Quite frankly, the 9 trees will be most grateful, and all their little inhabitants. I really don't see it's going to be too much different. I'd be quite happy to approve it, but I'll keep the debate open for a while and make the motion yet.
Councillor Harvey.
Me and Andrew got different views on this. I was going the other way, simply because I think the landscape impact of the movement of the property from where it was originally proposed to where it is now is of significance, and I think the officer's commentary on that is worth thinking about. Yes, all right, I get the loss of the 9 trees, and I agree with you, that would be a loss. But is the impact of moving the property as far forward as it then is, because of the visual impact it will then have on the rest of the area, is that outweighed by that? That's a good debate. I think that's fair to think about. So yeah, at the moment I'm concerned about the movement of the property as far forward as it is and the landscape impact. Do we defer it and go for a landscape visual impact assessment that would give the evidence one way or the other? Would it inform us in a better way? That might be an appropriate way to think about it, to be fair to the applicant, and listen to what the rest of the members have got to say.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I've looked at this and I'm very much in two minds on it. Moving it forward, I understand why the applicant wants to move it forward. It will make it a much nicer place to live. There's no doubt about that, much more open. But it does have a much bigger impact on the local landscape. And I think the solution has actually been put forward to us by Councillor Curbett, which is to get another landscape assessment. So I move for deferral for another landscape assessment. Is there anybody like to second it? Oh, take me pick. Councillor Court. Greg wants to come in before we go to the vote.
Yeah, just before you vote on that, I think a landscape visual impact appraisal has previously been asked for from the agent. It's not something that we can require, and they've declined to provide it. So it's not something that we can require of them for a single house. I'd also add that obviously members have viewed the site and the photographs, so we'll be aware of its impact. I won't get anything more particularly from a landscape visual impact appraisal than actually seeing it in its context.
Councillor Rattigan.
Although not completely happy that the applicant has moved 20 metres, it seems a huge amount of intrusion. I have to say that in my view, the officer's report is robust because we already have a planning permission on this site, and it would be slightly remiss of us not to move the officer's recommendation at this time rather than go for a visual impact assessment again, which really what additional benefit would that provide for us as a committee? And I'm not sure it would. So I'd like to move approval of what's in it, and if it gets voted down...
Councillor Rattigan, you can't move another motion whilst we have a motion, a seconded motion on the table. Sorry. Let me talk to Greg. Are you saying to us that another LVI will not benefit us at all?
I'm saying that one has already been asked for and declined to be provided, and if you've already visited the site, you will have already seen it in its context and understand what impact the proposal will have on its surroundings. So I don't think a landscape visual impact appraisal will move you forward very far. If you feel that that's necessary and then your viewing wasn't sufficient to be able to do that, or there are particular other viewpoints you want to be tested from what you might have seen, or you'd like the landscape visual impact appraisal to build upon what viewpoints and what additional landscaping might be proposed, then yes, of course, you can request one and defer it to request one again, but it's been declined once, but we can ask that question and come back to committee with whatever the outcome is.
Okay, thank you, Greg. We've got a proposal on the table, which has been seconded. We've all heard what Greg said, so let's vote on the proposal that's on the table. Those in favour of deferral? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And those against deferral? 1, 2, 3, 4. Right. That motion is lost. If somebody would like to put up another motion, Councillor Rattigan, I'm going to give you the first opportunity.
Thank you, Chair, and I apologise for my stupidity. It's late. I would like to move the officer's recommendation on the basis that as it sits in front of us, and I hope someone will second it.
Councillor Frost.
Chair, I'm happy to second it.
Thank you. Councillor Tomlin.
May I be allowed to suggest a condition at this stage? Thank you. And that I'm trying to read the conditions quickly in detail, but more landscaping to soften the impact, because the house shifting forward it's not the crest of a hill, but it's on a rise, and it appears to be this wooden pale fencing, which leaves it completely open as a field. Whether we could request some form of screening or planting scheme, because I don't see one, but I could be wrong. Thank you.
Greg.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, there are conditions already, page 312, for example, that require details of soft landscaping to be provided, but certainly we can add an informative note that confirms that the expectation is that the plans already provided are significantly increased in terms of the amount of planting that is shown to provide screening from key vantage points.
Councillor Rattigan, are you happy with that condition?
I am, and can I, if that is a condition that already sits there, can we ask for that to be early implementation, that screening?
The condition requires details of a maintenance programme, what is usual, and then management responsibilities as well, subsequent to that. What's usual for those conditions is it's the first planting season after the completion of development.
I wonder, can it be linked to a condition that it's done in conjunction with the building?
The difficulty with carrying out planting at the same time as carrying out the building operations is usually that the plants tend to lose out to the mechanical equipment that's on site, so they tend to get damaged or materials kind of.
Well, I'm sure because the applicant is here, he's hearing what I'm saying, so maybe he'll do something as the build progresses.
We can make a note to that effect as well.
Right, been moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Everyone except me. Yeah. You're not voting. Yeah. And those against? I will abstain. And abstentions is just me. Thank you. That's approved. Phil.
Thank you, Councillor. So the application is approved subject to the signing of a legal agreement and the conditions listed at the end of the report, as well as some additional notes with regards to further landscaping details and the implementation of those. Thank you.
And item 9, Little Bowlings, Goddard's Lane, Sheffield and Loddon. Officer.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is an application at Little Bowlings, Goddard's Lane, Sheffield on Loddon. The proposal is for the erection of a detached dwelling following the demolition of an existing category building and associated office. The property would be located at the rear of Little Bowlings with garage and parking area to the front and private garden to the rear. There is an update on page 9 of the update paper to remove the reference to height clear in the planning balance and conclusion section of the report, which is on page 342 of the agenda. The application is recommended for approval, subject to conditions located at the end of the report on pages 343 to 346 of the agenda.
Thank you. We have no speakers, so questions to officers? No questions to officers. In that case, debate. Councillor McCormack.
Move the recommendation.
And do we have a second? Second by Councillor Faulkner. Right. Anybody wish to speak on it? No. Those in favour? And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and those against? None, and I will abstain on that one because it's literally just round the corner from me. Thank you. I think that is everything on tonight's agenda. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you to the officers for all their hard work. Quite a hard session. Thank you very much, and good night.
Thank you, Chair. If we could just confirm that that application was approved. Thank you.